Okay, hello everyone. Thank you for joining us for this workshop. We really appreciate your participation and interest in this topic. We're really excited to have a good discussion today. A few things before we start. Please, your microphone will be muted until you're called on for questions. Please, you can disregard the enter your name and title in the chat. We're going to have a question later on where you can do that. We'll be answering questions at the end of each section, so please insert questions in the chat or raise your hand to speak when we get to that point. If you have any questions immediately, though, I do encourage you to put those in the chat at any time. This meeting is being recorded, and we'll also have this available to share on our website after the meeting. Okay, here we are today for the Green Transportation Infrastructure Workshop. My name is Sean Conrad. I'm a transportation planner at the North Central Texas Council of Governments Transportation Department on the Sustainable Development team. Also with me this morning is Sydney Steelman, who is a transportation planner also in Sustainable Development. She's going to set the stage shortly with a brief presentation, but I also wanted to go over the agenda. Real quick, we have our welcome and workshop introductions. We're also going to, in our first two segments this morning, we'll be covering an overview of green infrastructure resources. You'll be hearing from NCTCOG and also the Environmental Protection Agency on resources that we have available. We'll also be looking at local examples and implementation strategies. So we'll be reviewing some examples from around the region. We're going to break for lunch for an hour just to give you all a chance to eat lunch and catch up on emails and do those things you may need to do before regrouping again in the afternoon. And then we'll continue on with local examples, implementation strategies before our closing. I'm going to pass it over to Sydney now. She's going to just set the stage a little bit on what we're calling green infrastructure and the importance of green infrastructure in the region.
Hi everyone, good morning. As Sean said, my name is Sydney Steelman and I am a transportation planner on the Sustainable Development team at NCTCOG. I will be providing you all with a brief introduction to what green infrastructure is, how we have defined it, as well as an overview of the NCTCOG Green Infrastructure Resource Guidebook. So first, let's define what green infrastructure is. Our staff considers it to be development and transportation infrastructure techniques that connect environmental elements to transportation networks and management. Next slide, please. The need for green infrastructure, it helps alleviate development impacts, which can also often lead to a depletion of natural resources. Some benefits include the reduction of project costs and waste, while also improving air quality, pedestrian safety, public health, and many more. Next slide, please. There are various types of green infrastructure projects. Some of the ones we've highlighted here include recycled trail or construction materials, energy efficient lighting, structural support for trees, native plants and vegetation, and many more, as you can see. Next slide, please. So feeding into all of that, we have our NCTCOG Green Infrastructure Resource Guide, which provides a detailed overview for assessing the various choices you as engineers, planners, consultants may have when integrating green infrastructure into transportation projects. This guidebook covers the various types of green infrastructure, as you saw on the previous slide, as well as a few other aspects to green infrastructure. Next slide, please. It features some example case studies, which I will highlight three interesting ones here. First, we have the Red Oak Creek Trail in Cedar Hill, which included the use of native plants and over a quarter mile of granite trails with decomposed granite accents in amenity areas. Another example that is highlighted in the guidebook is the Merritt Road project located in Rowlett, Texas. This project integrated a treatment drainage system in approximately 1.7 miles of roadway improvements. The project also utilized native plants and included the installation of 4 bioretention systems. Overall, the purpose of this project was intended to support the area, surrounding areas to attract businesses and increase pedestrian safety. Another interesting case study you'll see in the guidebook is the historic Handley Urban Village streetscape located in Fort Worth. This project featured rehabilitated sidewalks near storefronts, which created a more inviting environment for visitors and residents, as well as better sidewalks for our pedestrians. More information regarding these 3 case studies can be found in the guidebook, as well as 40 other case studies from all around the region. So I would encourage you to check those out. Last slide, please. Another important aspect that is discussed in the guidebook are the various financial aspects of green infrastructure, such as overall cost and benefit analysis, as well as the possible benefits of implementing green infrastructure. This section provides an overview of how green infrastructure can potentially reduce the cost of land acquisition, operations and maintenance, infrastructure replacement, and various other project aspects. This section also features various cost benefit analysis tables per each type of green infrastructure that you can implement. And then it also breaks down various project aspects under those types of green infrastructure. Again, I would encourage you all to please check out this green resource guidebook. I can put a link in the chat box for your convenience, but it is also available on our website. That's all I have for you today, and I'm looking forward to the interesting presentations we have lined up for you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Sydney. Okay, before we go any further, we have a quick poll for you. We just want to get a feel for what areas you all are working in and how that pertains to the workshop today. So Sydney is going to put a link to that poll in the chat box for you. And we ask that you go ahead and take that poll and we'll look at the results. So I'll give you a minute to do that.
You should all be seeing the link in the chat box now.
Okay, I'll go ahead and pull that up. Okay, sorry, y'all. I'm just having a little bit of troubles here on my end today. So I'm not going to pull that up. However, it looks like we have a lot of people joining us who are in the engineering field. And so we got 23 engineers or people who are involved in engineering, 22 for planning, a couple for education, 5 environmental, and then 4 other. And if you entered other, go ahead and put in your chat box what area you're working in. It'd be really interesting to see that. Okay, I'm going to go back to our presentation. Okay, we got there. Thank you all for your patience. All right. We are going to continue on to our overview of green infrastructure resources. And we're going to start out with a presentation by Kate Filke, who is a principal transportation planner for the North Central Texas Council of Governments. She leads the environmental stewardship program for the transportation department at NCT-COG, where she oversees initiatives to mitigate development impact. So Kate, go ahead and take it away.
Thank you. Thank you, Sean, for the introduction, and thank you for the opportunity to present about a tool that NCT-COG's Transportation Department and Environment and Development Department collaborated on to provide to everybody. So if we could go to the next slide, please. So a few years ago, a member of the Transportation Department's policy board posed the following question. He said, we look at environmental programs as the right thing to do, but we look at them as a cost. How do we measure the return on investment of this work? So with only those two sentences as guidance, our staff launched efforts to create what became the Economic and Environmental Benefits of Stewardship tool. That's an awfully long name, so we just refer to our tool affectionately as EBS. Next slide, please. So we had a few goals as we developed EBS. Ecosystem services and environmental economics can be pretty complex topics, and we wanted to ensure that our online tool was user-friendly so that anybody could benefit from it. We wanted the information that the tool generated to be appropriate so it could influence policy and decision-making. And in order to meet that request from our policy board member to address return on investment, we wanted more than qualitative results. We wanted to ensure that we also produced quantitative results of stewardship and green infrastructure. Next slide, please. We did engage stakeholders and formed a project review committee. So members of those groups came from the agencies listed below. And some of the language we heard repeatedly from these folks were that there are barriers that exist to implementing green infrastructure, and that financial data was needed to show the benefit of this kind of work. And that maybe if we educated the public so that they wanted green infrastructure, they could influence policymakers to make it happen. And that green infrastructure needed to be included early in the planning process. Next slide, please. So these are the layers that underlie the EBS tool. It's the process the tool goes through. And so the initial step is identifying a kind of infrastructure that you plan on constructing that then is overlaid with environmental data. And then this results in a quantification of environmental impacts or potential environmental impacts. And from there, EBS identifies what stewardship type or green infrastructure type would be appropriate to address that impact. We include information about the cost of implementing that green infrastructure, And then we move into the ecosystem service that that infrastructure provides, which then takes us to the qualitative and quantitative benefits. Next slide, please. So I talked about how complex some of this data can be. And so here is an example. We did hire an environmental economist as a consultant to create a report and develop the data that underlies the tool. So here are some images of some of that data. This report is available on the tool website. Next slide. So you can access the tool through this link, but we are going to go ahead and do a demonstration of the tool for you. So here we are. I'm not sure if that image of people is getting in the way. Sean, can you confirm that you can see the EABS tool website, or Sydney?
Yeah, we can see it. Thank you.
Okay, great. So here is the home page, and on this side we have links to, say, a user guide, some case studies, and here's that data report I showed you some images from. But we're going to go ahead and evaluate a project. There are some instructions here. You may not be able to read them because they're kind of like gray, but you'll be able to see them when you open up the tool. We'll go ahead and hide those. And you can draw a project using either a line tool, a polygon tool, or a square. So we've had a roadway project in our long range plan up in Denton County. So I'll just kind of vaguely draw a little bit of it right there with the line tool and scroll down to the next step. Here, EABS is asking us to provide more information about our project. In this case, it is additional lanes for a roadway. And I'm going to just say for this exercise, 4 additional lanes. And EABS will estimate the width of those based on information from TxDOT. However, you can go over here to the right and customize that. And then it asks the question, will the project open up new areas for development? So we will go ahead and say yes in this case. Now, if you were creating something, a project that was not linear, you could go ahead and select other development would be your best choice. But you can see there's several other transportation options in here. But let's go ahead and run our analysis. It always hangs up for a little bit here at 85%. Because it's processing a more complicated layer. But have faith, we'll get there. And we'll have very colorful results when it is done. And as these things go, when you're doing a demonstration, it hangs up a little longer than usual. I think that's just the way things go. Oh, no, here we go. And here are those colorful results. I promised you, you can look at both these buttons and the pie chart for different displays of the results. And we can see in terms of acreage and linear feet, what kind of impact we have the potential to create on the underlying environmental data here. I want to emphasize this gold box here, which you may not be able to read. It's really important to note that EABS is not a tool for regulatory compensation. So here you can see we're impacting streams, we're impacting wetlands. The options that EABS produces are not necessarily acceptable under the Corps of Engineers regulations. This is really a green infrastructure and stewardship tool. So the next step is to explore the potential environmental effects that our project could have. So they are here in these orange boxes. If we wanted to learn more, say about the water quality impact, we could click the Learn More button, and you'll see there is some narrative provided here. You can do that for all of these buttons. We can also make a potential effect a priority, and that will affect which stewardship options are displayed. But let me go ahead and unclick that so that we see all of these stewardship options. And we can scroll down there, and we have the opportunity to learn more, in this case about detention ponds. And this produces this bar chart that shows both the costs and benefits of implementing detention ponds. It's important to note that we had to do this on the base of 1 acre of a detention pond. These costs and benefits are not necessarily linear. So we decided the safest way to communicate this information was based on that 1 acre. And here in this box, you can see some of the ecosystem services generated by detention ponds, ranging from stormwater management to nitrogen and phosphorus removal, and potentially recreation, depending on the design of the detention pond. And we provide both low and high cost estimates to create a range there. And there's some more narrative providing more information. And you could go back and get the same information by viewing details for all of these stewardship options. Finally, you can compile all these options into a report, and then you can print this out. So we're hoping that this is really user-friendly information that you can take to decision makers who are not experts in green infrastructure or ecosystem services. So if we can go back to our presentation.
Thank you, Kate. Really appreciate that overview of that very useful tool. And we'll get back.
Yeah, my contact information is there. When you're able to receive these slides, you'll see that we do have screen grabs of all of the steps.
All right. Thank you very much, Kate.
Thank you.
Okay, our next presentation is going to be going over some more resources that we hope will be useful for you. Tamara Cook is going to present. She's a senior program manager in our Environment and Development Department at NCT-COG. She manages programs and projects related to a variety of sustainability topics, including water resources and conservation, public works, energy efficiency, building codes, and many more. So we're looking forward to hearing from you. Tamara, go ahead.
Okay, yes, thank you, Sean. Thank you for having me present today on 2 programs that the Environment and Development Department here at the Council of Governments is actively working on to encourage communities to adopt in our region or participate in. So one of those is Tri-Swim that I'm going to specifically talk about, which is an appendix to the Integrated Stormwater Management Program manual for those of you who are familiar with ISWIM. And then also the North Texas RISE Coalition. I'm going to speak a few minutes on that new committee that we have that's very focused on sustainability challenges and issues in our region. So just getting into ISWIM, just a primer for anyone that's on the line that isn't sure what that is. Hopefully, I see a lot of familiar names on the line, so hopefully some are. ISWIM stands for Integrated Stormwater Management. And so I'm bringing this forward in terms of green stormwater infrastructure. I know Sydney talked about other types of green infrastructure like solar and some other things, but this is really focused on green stormwater infrastructure. And it's a regional program that's been in place for almost, I think, 2 decades, close to that at this point. And it's a tool to help our local governments meet or exceed state and federal requirements for stormwater management. Next slide. Next slide. So there's several major goals of the ISWIM program. I'm not going to read all of this to you, but really we are working with our local governments who have adopted ISWIM principles and the manual and criteria into their development regulations to reduce flooding, protect property values, and again, meet federal requirements for stormwater management within development. Next slide. For those that are looking or interested in implementing ISWIM, there's several different options. Several years ago, our department led an effort with the ISWIM subcommittee that is under our Public Works Council here at COG to develop a certification program. It's a more simplified version of the criteria and technical manual for those of you who are familiar with those two documents. For those cities that want to have some sort of certification, and it's a gold, kind of a gold, silver, bronze tiered system, scoring system. And our most recent city that has joined is Plano as a silver certified community. But there are also the original criteria and technical manuals. Those are periodically updated with changes based on things happening in the region and how projects are actually being implemented and using ISWIM. We have a subcommittee that oversees changes to those two documents. And all of that is posted on our website. Next slide. So as I mentioned, Plano is our newest certified community for ISWIM. They are not on this slide because we literally just certified them and are going to their council in September to present that certification. But we do have all the other cities that are currently actively using ISWIM, either as original founders or as certified communities. And the certified communities there are on the left. We also did certify our first gold ISWIM community this year. The city of Salina received that designation. So we're very excited about that designation. Next slide. So I was asked to really focus in on TriSwim, but couldn't really do that without the background of ISWIM. TriSwim really builds on the original ISWIM program, and it is an appendix to the ISWIM manual. So a city could adopt just traditionally the ISWIM manual and criteria manual, and then if they choose to, they could adopt the TriSwim appendix. I gotta be careful about what I'm saying here, so I say the right thing, right acronym. And so this was developed about a decade or so ago, I want to say, as an appendix to the criteria manual. And it's really available for any local government to use, engineers, private developers, but it's very focused on stormwater management within streets, roads, and highways, hence transportation integrated stormwater management, or TriSwim. So the appendix provides strategies, again, focused on roads and highways with stormwater impacts in mind, and provides alternatives and opportunities to address and mitigate those impacts. And I've posted the website here so that when you receive these slides, you can go directly to the website where the TriSwim materials are posted. Next slide. So the goals, again, are it's a planning framework and design framework for incorporating those strategies into a project development process. And on the right, I've put a snippet of the table of contents of the TriSwim appendix. So you can kind of see how it's outlined in the different categories that are available. So it goes through the development process, what kind of site considerations you need to take into consideration when you're looking at a project, and then some design criteria on different elements that I've got an example of on the next slide as well. But really the goal here is that it increases uniformity across the region as additional cities adopt these approaches, and across the city as well in terms of how these strategies are applied within the city itself and throughout the development process. Next slide. So as I just stated, this is an example of one of the design criteria elements. I just wanted to provide a snippet of kind of the detail that's in this document. It is very detailed. And this is the water quality protection design criteria element. And so there are, as laid out in the snippet there on the right, treatment levels that are options: level 1, level 2, level 3, depending on what level of treatment you are looking to treat the water to and what you're trying to reach. There's a whole lot of background information and research related to some of these that are included as well, that provide really good references for communities that are using these strategies within their development process. Next slide. And as I mentioned early on, the new certification process that was developed is this document right here. This is the form or the application for the certification that a community or even a county would go and fill out, denoting what, if they meet partial or full points, essentially, of the different applications and the different mandatory outcomes that are spelled out here. So if they've adopted ISWIM, they're going through and identifying which ones they are meeting and to what extent they're meeting those outcomes, and also the references within their development regulations or other design guidelines that they have and where to find those references within their community documents and ordinances or whatever else is appropriate. And then these are tallied and sent to a review committee for review, a committee of peers that have adopted ISWIM, and they determine whether or not the community meets that gold, silver, or bronze tiered measurement is what we call it, or certification. But I did just want to point out, TriSwim is an optional outcome in this. It's not required, as I stated. It's optional when a community adopts ISWIM, but you do get extra points essentially for adopting those. Okay, next slide. So this is wrapping up on TriSwim. Resources available for those that are interested in learning more. There is a very nice brochure, which this is a snippet of one of those flyers that's on the website that really talks about what is TriSwim and how to use the document. The document is posted online, the appendix is, so you can go and peruse that. I think it was around 40 pages, if I remember correctly. And we have a very nice website that talks about TriSwim as well and provides all of these resources available. And that, I think, wraps up TriSwim. Next slide. Let me do a time check. Okay, I'm doing good. So kind of in the same vein as TriSwim, we do have on the ISWIM website a lot of construction controls that are provided and drawings that are provided as resources for implementing the green and stormwater infrastructure projects or strategies. And there's an effort underway right now from our Public Works Council to update the standard drawings that are found at the back of the Public Works construction standards. For those on the line that are engineers who work for communities in our region, this may be a very familiar book that has been around for many, many years. And the Public Works Construction Standards was most recently updated in about the 2017 timeframe, and we are now in the 5th edition. But as part of that update, only the specifications were updated, not the drawings. We just didn't have the resources at that time to do both. So we came back, and for the last 2.5 years, we've been working with the Public Works Council in a small group to update those drawings. And so we are hopeful that over the next 6 months, those will all be released for public comment and finalized through the Public Works Council and approved to be posted online sometime, hopefully early next year is our goal. But related to stormwater, I did put some information here, a lot of information for those that are interested in this. The standard drawings group has provided updates to the Division 1000, which is the erosion and sediment controls. And so all of the drawings listed here, there are some new drawings that they are adding based on just how things have evolved in our region and the types of erosion controls that cities are starting to use or have been using that were not originally documented in the 4th edition of the Public Works Construction Standards and the standard drawings. So there will be some new drawings that we have been working with this group to complete. And then Division 6000, the stormwater control, is currently under comment right now by the subcommittee, and there will be some major changes to some of those documents or drawings as well, based on current practices in our region and kind of the state of the region in terms of how things are actually being built and designed in our region. So all of the resources are there on the drawings, standard drawings, and where to find those documents. And I would be happy to take any questions offline or during chat if you've got anything on that. Okay, so I think that wraps up kind of the ISWIM and standard drawing section. I wanted to just quickly throw in there, and I will shift gears. Next slide. So this is kind of moving up very high level in terms of kind of regional initiatives on sustainability in general happening in our region. So COG has been working with several communities in our region for several years as a group called the North Central Texas Stewardship Forum. And more recently, over the last 18 months or so, that group has expanded their focus and changed sort of their mission a little bit and their name. And this group is now known as the North Texas Regional Integration of Sustainability Efforts, or RISE for short. The RISE Coalition is what we call it internally. And this group of local governments is working to engage interested local governments in peer exchange opportunities. And they have really the key purpose is to share information in the region on things that are happening related to sustainability. So we have many committees at COG that are focused on all sorts of topics related to sustainability, but a lot of times those are siloed. And so this group is made up primarily currently of sustainability directors and some environmental managers that participate in this group. So they have kind of this larger viewpoint of sustainability overall in the local government operations and facilities and all sorts of different things that they are focused on, and the community at large. Next slide. So they came together about 1.5 years ago and developed a work program that's really just a scope of work for COG staff to work within. And they had 4 key topic areas that they really wanted to focus on with projects or program development starting out. And those were the regional emissions assessment, an emissions impact analysis and mitigation and adaptation strategy toolkit, urban heat island reduction strategy analysis, and some work on food diversion and waste reduction programs. So those were the 4 key topic areas that they originally set out to tackle. And we are still working on those 4 key areas and probably will be for quite a while. So currently, as a result of this mission and focus, we are COG staff in conjunction with the Transportation Department and Environment and Development Department are working to compile data currently for the first regional greenhouse gas inventory for a 12-county area in our region. So that's very exciting. We've been working on that officially now for about 6 months. And hopefully we'll be wrapping up some of the initial phases of that early next year. The data collection process for a region of our size is very long and arduous. So we are working on that process currently. We are also working on producing an emissions reduction strategy toolkit for local governments, something that can be used by any local government, whether or not they have adopted a climate action plan or a sustainability plan or an environmental plan of some kind, but something that's out there that has strategies that are available to reduce emissions. Not necessarily just GHGs or greenhouse gas emissions, but all emissions. So it's a comprehensive toolkit. And things like urban heat island strategies and renewable energy and energy strategies, transportation strategies, water and wastewater are kind of the key sectors that we'll be looking at. And then starting next year, we're going to be continuing our work on the inventory and the toolkit, but we're going to start building and focusing on urban heat island emphasis. This group really wants to focus on that topic moving forward and producing some regional resources, maybe some mapping. They also want to establish an equity working group to really start bringing equity into regional discussions and having a focus on developing some tools and resources there for our region, maybe some equity mapping that they'd like to do for our region as well. And the website is there at the bottom for more information on all of those. Next slide. I'm going to be wrapping up here. So currently our membership in the coalition is there on the right. We have 9 members currently, including the Tarrant Regional Water District. The membership structure, there is voting members, non-voting, and participants, which are anyone else that is not a local government. So academia, nonprofits, private sector. We have lots of variety and diversity in the attendance at these meetings. So I am inviting everyone to join us for the next meeting on October 15th, if this is something that you're interested in learning more about. We have presentations on all sorts of sustainability topics, ranging from waste management to energy, electric vehicles, solar energy, it's everything, water, wastewater. All of the information on membership, if there is a community on the line that didn't know about this and is interested, is posted on the website that's linked here at the bottom. Next slide. And so again, the next meeting is October 15th. We are doing those virtually for now, so we would love to have anyone join those meetings that's interested. And we should be posting the agenda, I would think, in the next month or so, so that you can see if it's something that you want to participate in. And if you do have any questions on that group specifically and getting involved in that group, please just reach out to me and I'd be happy to field those questions for you. I think that is all I had, Sean.
All right, thank you so much.
Yes,
Campbell.
thank
We really
you.
appreciate that. Very good information. Okay, we're going to switch over now to a couple of presentations by the Environmental Protection Agency, talking about their green infrastructure program and resources they have available as tools for you all to check out. So I am going to switch over to a presentation here. 1 second.
Sorry, I had to go get rid of a extraneous noise in the house.
All right, let me introduce you real quick here. And 1 second here, guys. Something weird has happened. Okay. Got it. Just over. Okay, I'm going to, let me introduce you, and then I'm going to share my screen and the presentation. So we have Nelly Smith and Brent Larson from EPA. Brent, I know you had to fill in a little bit last minute. So when you get started, if you could just say a few words about yourself, that would be really great. I appreciate that. Nelly has served as an environmental engineer in various environmental programs for over 20 years. So during her tenure at EPA, she's focused on enhancing tribal and state partnerships to build sustainable environmental programs. She's currently serving as the chief of the state and tribal programs section in the EPA Region 6 Water Division. Okay, let me pull up your presentation again, and then Brent, you can go ahead and introduce yourself and get started.
Oh, while you're doing that, I'm Brent Larson. I'm chief of the NPDS permitting section here in EPA Region 6. And from about 87 to 2010, I was the stormwater coordinator for the NPDS program. Since then, I've been the chief of the permitting section that writes the permits, where EPA still writes permits in Region 6. So an old stormwater hand. But I'm filling in for Susanna Perea, who is.
Thank you, Brent. I'm just working on screen sharing. I seem to have lost my screen sharing button here, so just bear with me. There we go. Okay. We're getting close. All right, Brent, can you see that?
I can see it.
Okay, give me 1 second.
Was I on mute earlier when I was talking?
Yes,
Rats.
so we are good to go. Take it away, Brent.
Okay, yeah, I'm Brent Larson, chief of the NPDS permitting section here in EPA Region 6. The stormwater team is in my section. It's Susanna Perea and Nelly Smith. I mean, Nelly used to be in my section, sorry. And let's see, Monica Burrell and Nassim Jahan. And from about late 86, early 87 till 2010, I was the stormwater coordinator for the region. So got a little background in the stormwater world. With that, I'm going to pop on over into the overview of the green infrastructure program. Next slide, please. We're going to talk a little bit about recent regulations and statutes and what's EPA doing, and some of the EPA resources that are out there and available to y'all. Next, please. Well, the Water Infrastructure Improvement Act from January 19 created an Office of the Municipal Ombudsman, amended the Clean Water Act to codify and define integrated planning, required to report to Congress on permits enforcement actions with integrated plans, and actually added a statutory definition of green infrastructure to the Clean Water Act and formalized EPA's green infrastructure program. Next, please. The America's Water Infrastructure Act of October 18 directed EPA to create a stormwater infrastructure funding task force to ID some sources of state funding for stormwater infrastructure, identify how the sources of funding affected the affordability of infrastructure, taking also into account the cost of financing, and evaluate whether funding sources are sufficient to support capital expenditures and long-term O&M costs. The Environmental Financial Advisory Board accepted the charge to form this work group. Next, please. Some of the newer EPA resources, the Green Streets Handbook from March of 21, pretty recent there, developed to help folks select, design, and implement site design strategies and green infrastructure practices for roads, alleys, and parking lots. Provides a background information on street, and that should be road typologies, not RAD typologies, and offers a programmatic framework to use when identifying areas that can be either new design or retrofits for green infrastructure practices or systems. And it also provides a systematic approach to begin reducing the impervious surface footprint to the public right-of-ways and associated off-street service parking areas. Next, please. Some of the other things we've got out there are compendium of MS4 permitting approaches across the country. And that present approaches that encourage or require green infrastructure in MS4 programs across the country. And then Saving the Rain is actually green stormwater solutions for congregations that want to enhance their grounds by implementing green stormwater management practices, and helps assist them make some decisions there. Next, please. Some of the things that are on the way include Santa Fe had a pilot on in their railroad area. They're incorporating green structure into roadway projects, and there's going to be a guide letting folks know about their experiences. And then the New Jersey Green Streets document will talk 3 case studies identifying the goals, design, installation, funding challenges for each of them. And that's supposed to be coming out, or has recently come out here in August. Oh, well, it came out August 2020, sorry, a year ago. And next, please. And then we've got the April 21 classic tool for green infrastructure. It's a life cycle analysis tool for stormwater infrastructure costs. Uses the total life cycle cost framework to support feasibility and planning for stormwater infrastructure programs. And it is geared towards different types of stormwater management practices. That list is what's included in the classic tool. That'd be interesting to compare some of that with the EBS program too. I wonder, see how they compare. Next, please. And there are a series of webcasts EPA has been having on green infrastructure topics, and every time they have a webcast, it is archived for future use by folks who weren't able to attend it when it was live. Some of the 21 schedule included green congregations in April, funding green infrastructure in May, green streets. I believe that was early August. I tried to look for it this morning. I'm not sure it's up. The archived version is up yet, but that did just happen here early August, as I recall. And operation and maintenance is going to be this fall, and federal collaboration on green infrastructure will be this winter. You can get it at the webcast series via that link there and sign up for them, or take advantage of the archives versions. Thank you. Next, please. And so on behalf of Susanna Perea, wasn't able to be with us today, I'd like to thank you for my portion, or my section portion of the presentation. And we'll go ahead and turn it over to Nelly Smith.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you, Sean, for the invitation to this workshop. And as Sean mentioned, I am the section chief for the state and tribal programs in Water Division with an EPA Region 6 office in Dallas. My group manages the Clean Water Act grants. Those grants are offered to the states to implement their water programs, including the funds under the Clean Water Act 319H that might be used to support green infrastructure and other urban projects. I've been with EPA more than 15 years. I was the Stormwater Program MS4 coordinator back in 2012 until I believe end of 2018. So I was working very close with Susanna Perea and also on their Brand Larsen NPDES permit. Next one. So what we will cover here in this presentation is a little bit background information on the Clean Water Act 319, how the this funding or grants opportunities support the role in urban projects. We also will present other opportunities for funding urban projects, GI, low impact development projects. We will also have a presentation or a slide on how we assess eligibility for 319 funding. And also I will mention urban project successes here within the Region 6. Next, please. So a little bit background about definitions under the Clean Water Act. For us here in my section, it's very important to understand the projects when we define where we wanted to determine eligibility and requirements for specific projects. So here are very key specifics of definitions of point source that are regulated under the Clean Water Act and PDS permit. So basically water point source are any confined and discrete conveyance, including any pipe, ditch, channel from which pollutants are or might be discharged. Discharges may be regulated in a manner consistent with the state and tribal water quality standards or under the MPDS permit. Non-point source are not regulated or specifically defined as any source of water pollution that doesn't meet point source definition. Non-point sources are also defined as polluted runoff from rain or snowmelt carrying natural or any anthropogenic pollutants to waters. And that includes also agricultural stormwater discharges and irrigation return flows. Thank you. Next one. So the importance of the MPDS work in urban waters, we definitely want to fund 319 projects within urban areas. Basically within EPA, the funds allocations that we receive are based on the president's budget and any congressional appropriation language that is included within the budget, presidential budget. EPA awards funds to authorized agencies to manage the clean water grants 319, the state agencies or authorized tribals award, some of them award those funds to sub-grantees through the process that we call request for proposals. For instance, the Texas Commission of Environmental Quality in Texas, they have a process where they put requests for proposals and they sub-award those grants to specific projects. Next one, please. Next slide. Okay, there you go. So funding under the Clean Water Act, we also include the State Revolving Fund. Here in our region, we have Denise Hamilton, who is the Community Infrastructure section, and she manages all the State Revolving Fund. Her phone number is 214-665-2775, and basically those are no grants, they are basically loans. You will have to pay those loans, and some of the cases they do have some very low interest. The other mechanism that we have is fund or use the Water Resource Reform and Development Act that was issued back in 2014. So any eligible projects can be like any project related to stormwater, we can fund or provide financial assistance that includes to manage, reduce, treat, or recapture stormwater or other kind of projects. Under the FEMA hazard mitigation, also we can fund a specific green infrastructure, low impact developments that falls under the FEMA requirements. Just to mention that since 2009, EPA under the Clean Water Store Revolving Fund, we have provided more than $2 billion for GI projects. And I believe this is probably is going to be increased in the future. And again, if you have any questions about the Clean Water State Revolving Fund, I'm planning to include Dennis Hamilton information, phone number and email regarding how to apply for those Clean Water SRF funds. Next slide. Okay. So I think I mentioned this one. Just go ahead and go to the next slide, please. Here are general eligible activities that we can cover under the Clean Water Act 319, any GI, stormwater infrastructure activities, watershed planning, technical assistance, monitoring, BMPs, outreach and education projects, technology transfer and training. Any other activity that is not covered or specified in the NPDES or stormwater permit. Next one, please. Some of the 319 program guidelines for urban stormwater runoff mentioned, Brent Larson mentioned some of them. So basically, states might use the 319 funds to those urban stormwater activities that do not direct or implement a final or municipal separate storm sewer system NPDES permit. 319 funds might support, but do not directly implement activities required by the phase 1 and phase 2 permit that include also activities under the stormwater OMS4 management plan activities. Next one, I think it's just here is just basically some regulations on under the NPDES program. So basically here, when we receive or when the state want to funds 319 or any GI projects under 319 funds, there are specific questions that we ask or the state asks themselves. One of the questions is the proposed project or practice required by the NPDES permit? Is the project distinguishable from actions being taken to comply with the NPDES permit? Other questions are if the proposed practice is similar to actions required by the NPDES permit. Will the 319 funded practice go above or beyond the permit requirements? So when we determine eligibility to funds projects on the 319, we look basically very close the language in the permit, NPDES permit or MS4 stormwater planning documents. Next one. Here in Region 6, we have a very success story under the 319. That's the Little Rock in Arkansas and the GI low impact development. The city of Little Rock built or implement GI at the main street. The benefits of the rain gardens and other water infiltration system using GI applications has been very successful for the region. So basically the project or the initiative or the goal of that project was to reduce the volume and the velocity to improve water quality from runoff. Some of the fundings that Arkansas used was the 319 in addition to other sources of funds. The list of BMPs that were included there were the rain gardens. They plant some native plants at the main street. They use bioswales, porous parking, and others. So the total cost for this project was $2.5 million. Next one. I'm sorry, I'm losing my voice here. Next slide. But that's very much. Thank you so much for the opportunity to present here at the GI workshop. And if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. My phone number is 214-665-7109. And I will also include my information email in the chat. Thank you, Sean.
Thank you, Nelly and Brent. Really appreciate you joining us and presenting all of that really great information. We have some time now for some questions. If anybody has them, Sydney, do we have questions in the chat or any hands raised out there?
I'm not seeing anything at this time.
Okay. So everyone, just a reminder, if you have any questions along the way, feel free to enter those in the chat at any time, questions, comments, and we will address them when we get to the end of the sections. Okay. So not seeing questions right now. I am going to go ahead then and continue on. We'll be a little bit ahead of schedule to our next section. We're going to go and delve now into local examples and implementation strategies. So we'll be hearing from local examples of how green infrastructure has been implemented throughout the region, challenges that have been encountered, opportunities that have been encountered, lessons learned. So again, feel free to ask questions along the way, and we'll get to those when we get to the end of this section before lunch. We have a couple of opportunities for questions and answers. The next presentation is going to be, I need to switch over here, presented by Sagar Medicetti with the city of Louisville. He is, so Sagar's been a traffic engineer with the city of Louisville for the past about 5.5 years. He has been working in the realm of traffic engineering for 17 years. And at the city of Louisville, he works on CIP projects involving street improvements and traffic engineering. So he's going to be talking about the city of Louisville Old Town project and how that's integrated some green infrastructure techniques. Okay, Sagar, I'm going to go ahead and share your presentation.
Sure.
Okay, we're ready to go, Sagar.
Good morning. This is Sagar Medicetti for the city of Louisville. I just wanted to say that the screen is cut off a little bit, Sean. I guess it's
Okay, yeah, let me see. I'll see if I can fix that.
Okay.
Thank you for pointing that out. Are you seeing it now?
Yes, yes.
Full screen?
Yes, I do.
Okay, great.
Good morning. Today I'm going to talk about rain gardens, also known as bioswales, that were incorporated in a recently completed streetscape project in Old Town Louisville. The terms rain gardens and bioswales would be used interchangeably throughout the presentation because they both mean the same thing. Next slide, please. The streetscape project location is illustrated in this location map. Old Town Louisville is generally located 1 mile east of I-35E and 1 mile west of State Highway 121 Business. Main Street and Mill Street shown on this map used to be, both of those streets used to be TxDOT farm to market roadways. In the early 2000s, City of Louisville attained jurisdiction of these streets. The project area includes 1/2 mile length on Main Street and 1/2 mile length on Mill Street. On the map, you can see the Old Town core area and City Hall on the west side, and an Old Town rail transit station and the DCTA railroad on the east side. The goals of this streetscape project were to provide safe and comfortable multimodal access for pedestrians, bikes, transit users, motorists, and trucks, and also add much needed on-street parking in downtown. Next slide, please. The schematic drawings you can see for Main Street and Mill Street show what was planned for this project. Reduced number of travel lanes with road diet that allowed the opportunity to provide on-street parking on both sides of the street. Bike lanes, on-street bike lanes, wider sidewalks for pedestrians, landscaping. A total of 208 large trees were added in the 1 mile project area. In the streetscape project, landscaping serves many functions. Large trees provide shade, comfort, and improved aesthetics for the pedestrians in the sidewalk. They also act as a safety buffer between the sidewalk and the travel lanes for the pedestrians, thereby improving their pedestrian safety. Also provide an opportunity to include rain gardens for stormwater management, which is the topic for today. Next slide, please. This is a before and after picture of one-way Main Street. The road diet on Main Street allowed the opportunity to provide a bike lane, wide sidewalks, and also incorporate landscape areas. Next slide, please. This is a before and after picture of Mill. Yes. This is a before and after aerial picture of Mill Street. You would notice in the before picture that Mill Street was devoid of any vegetation. It was all concrete within the right-of-way. The project incorporated landscaping that would provide shade for pedestrians and also provide an opportunity to reduce the stormwater runoff. Next slide, please. Why did Lewisville incorporate rain gardens in the Main and Mill project? Lewisville has a 2025 vision plan. 2025 is a centenary year of the Lewisville's incorporation. This project was planned to meet 2 of the 9 big goals of the 2025 vision plan, which are sustainability and revitalization of the Old Town. So early on during the planning stages, a decision was made by the city to add rain gardens in the landscaping areas of the project. Next slide, please. The green areas on the map for the Main Street and Mill Street show the areas where rain gardens were incorporated on Main Street and Mill Street. Those were the most suitable areas for rain gardens. A total of 30 rain garden cells were added to the project. Next slide, please. What are rain gardens? Rain gardens are shallow, landscaped, and vegetated depressions that are designed to capture the stormwater runoff, treat the stormwater runoff to remove harmful pollutants, and provide for infiltration into the soil to recharge the underground water table. In this image, you can see number 1, where the runoff from the impervious surface flows to the rain garden. Number 3 shows the rock berms at the perimeter of the rain garden to dissipate the velocity of the rainwater. Number 4 shows the well draining soil mix, which provides for filtration, and then the vegetation and plants. And number 2 absorb some of the rainwater. Next slide, please. Well, why do we need to treat the stormwater? Why not let the stormwater go to the storm drain inlet? According to the EPA, stormwater is the leading cause of water pollution. Stormwater that falls on our streets, parking lots, and yards gets carried directly to the storm drain inlets. Rainwater picks up the oils, chemicals that drip from our parked vehicles on the roads, pesticides, herbicides, fertilizers that we use in our road yards, and conveys them directly to the storm drain inlets. We know that stormwater does not go to a water treatment plant. It gets conveyed to our creeks, streams, rivers, and lakes, thereby polluting those water bodies. This polluted water harms the aquatic life, fish, wildlife, natural habitat, and even puts humans at risk. When rainfall occurs, the first flush event contains the most polluted water. Rain gardens, when incorporated in transportation infrastructure, will be a solution to treat this first flush event. Next slide, please. So what a rain garden does is intercept the water from the road infrastructure before it gets to the storm drain inlet, cleanses and filters that water, and recharges the underground water table. Next slide, please. What does a rain garden in Old Town Louisville look like? This is an example rain garden on Main Street, situated between the sidewalk and the on-street parking. Next slide, please. Few more examples of rain gardens showing their operation during a rain garden event. You can see the stormwater entering from the street through the curb cuts and flowing longitudinally in between the pedestrian crossing concrete step pads. Next slide, please. These are a couple of other rain gardens on Mill Street. In the picture to the left, we can see a shallow rain garden about 5 feet wide. And on the picture to the right, there's a relatively deeper and wider rain garden situated between the on-street parking and the sidewalk. Next slide, please. Two types of rain gardens were used with the Main and Mill project. A rain garden type 1 on the picture to the left shows a shallower rain garden with 6-inch depth at the center from the street grade. A rain garden type 2 in the picture to the right shows a deeper rain garden with 12-inch depth at the center from the street grade. Next slide, please. The elements of a rain garden are curb cuts, rocks placed behind the curb cut, vegetated swale, slight longitudinal slope, well-drained soil, and an exit for excess water. These rain garden elements are discussed further in the next few slides. Next slide, please. One before. Curb cuts. Curb cuts need to be a minimum width of 18 inches to provide an access point for the storm water from the street to enter the swale. The curb cuts are spaced roughly 10 to 15 feet apart. Next slide, please. Rocks next to the curb cut. If storm water enters the swale at a fast pace from the street, it has the potential to cause erosion of the soils, mulch, and may even uproot smaller plants. For this reason, rocks are placed next to the curb cuts to dissipate the velocity of the entering water. For this project, 2-inch to 4-inch size river rocks were used. And the rocks were placed at a depth of 3 feet from the curb cuts. Next slide, please. Vegetation. Hardy, drought-tolerant Texas native plants were planted in the swale. These plants soak up some of the entering stormwater. Next slide, please. Another element of a rain garden is a slight longitudinal slope. Rain gardens need to be designed with a slight longitudinal slope so that the stormwater continues to flow and covers the area of the entire rain garden, providing water for all the plants and also facilitating infiltration along the entire landscape bed. Next slide, please. Well-drained soils. It's very important to have the engineered mix of soil. The soil mix for the rain garden needs to be a mix of topsoil, sand, and compost, which will allow infiltration into the ground. For this project, we used an engineered soil mix of 70% medium to sharp sand, 20% compost, and 10% sandy loam topsoil. Infiltration rate for the project specified that 6 inches of standing water should drain and percolate within 48 hours. During infiltration, the soil breaks down the hydrocarbons and harmful pollutants, thereby treating the filtering the water in the swale, which recharges the underground water table. One important thing when designing the soils is to note that it is very critical to ensure a 5-foot minimum separation between the bottom of the rain garden to the top of the underground water table. This is to prevent pollution of the underground water table. Next slide, please. The final element of the rain garden is an outlet for the excess water. Any excess water in the swale that does not get consumed by the plants and does not percolate into the soil needs to be drained out. The image on this slide shows a drain pipe that conveys the excess water from the swale to a storm drain inlet. Sometimes in a larger rain garden, a storm drain inlet is placed at the low point of the swale as well. For the main and mill project in Louisville, we did not place a drain pipe or an inlet, but we used downstream curb cuts to carry the excess water from the rain garden back into the street and then to the storm drain inlet, which is illustrated in the next few slides. Next slide, please. Rain garden operation. You would notice on this photo that each rain garden cell has an inlet curb cut and an outlet curb cut. Water enters from the inlet curb cut, provides water for the vegetation. Some of the water gets infiltrated into the soil, and any excess water is designed to flow out of the outlet curb cut into the street and then to the storm drain inlet. Next slide, please. In this photo, in the photo to the left, you can see water entering the bioswale through the curb cut. You will also notice in this photo that the rocks immediately next to the curb cut are wrapped in a wire mesh. This was done so that rocks don't slip out into the street, creating a potential hazard for the bicyclists and the bike lane. You would also notice that the rocks at the curb sit slightly above the street surface. We noticed the problem that during excess rain, because the curb cuts are designed as an outlet as well, during heavy rains, mulch was getting washed out into the street. So we placed the rocks a little bit higher, and that prevented water to enter, but was stopping the solid debris from entering. Parks Department would need to keep the curb cuts clear of debris with their maintenance program. Next slide, please. The slight longitudinal slope keeps water moving along the entire length of the rain garden, providing water for all the plants and allowing infiltration along the entire length of the swale, and then excess water drains out of the from the downstream curb cut. Next slide, please. For the pedestrian crossings from the parking area to the sidewalk, two types of rain garden crossings were used. In the case of deeper rain gardens, metal grates were used, which is shown in the photo to the left. In the case of shallower rain gardens, concrete pads were used. In both of these cases, stormwater can flow longitudinally along the swale, either under the metal grate or in between the concrete step pads. Next slide, please. This is another recently concluded city project where larger rain gardens were installed. The building at the top right corner of the photo is the Louisville's new multi-generational rec center called Thrive that opened in late 2020. In this aerial image, you can see 4 large rain gardens that were used in the parking area. Rain garden 1 is at the roundabout closer to the building, and the other rain garden 2, 3, and 4 were installed, larger rain gardens installed in between the parking spaces. Closer photos are shown in the next few slides. Next slide, please. These photos show the rain garden at the roundabout closer to the rec center building. Sawtooth curb allows rainwater to enter from the pavement into the landscape bed. The rocks filter the water, and the landscaping and the trees absorb some of the water. And you can see in the photo to the right, you can see a storm drain inlet placed at the low point of the swale to absorb any excess water. Next slide, please. This is a larger rain garden between the parking areas. During a rain event, stormwater from the impervious parking lot sheet flows and enters the bioswale. The smaller rocks placed at the outer edges of the swale dissipate the velocity of the water and collect any solid debris. As discussed earlier, vegetation, including the trees and native plants, consume some of the rainwater, and the excess water continues to flow to the low point of the rain garden where there's a storm drain inlet to receive it. Next slide, please. This is another larger rain garden in the same area. We can, next slide, please. Some challenges we faced with the projects are illustrated in the next few slides. Next slide, please. In the This is an illustration of Main Street parking situation and the landscaping area, the rain garden areas. And the design, we did not include a mow strip in the rain garden behind the curb. The design showed 18-inch wide rocks immediately behind the curb. This created a problem. On Main Street, we have parallel parking next to the curb. In the photo to the right, taken during construction, you can see that a person exiting a parked vehicle will need to step into the rain garden in order to access the nearest pedestrian crossing. It would be difficult, for example, a lady wearing high heels to step into the rocks behind the curb and walk to the closest rain garden crossing. Next slide, please. This is a design picture which shows that there were rocks immediately behind the curb, but there was no mow strip. Next slide, please. So an 18-inch wide concrete mow strip was incorporated during construction by change order. So now people alighting from a parked vehicle next to a rain garden can walk along the concrete strip to access the nearest pedestrian crossing to get to the sidewalk. Next slide, please. Challenge number 2 was drainage from private property. The photo to the left is a photo prior to the project. Water used to drain from the parking lot over to the street, as shown with the blue lines. But with the project, the sidewalk was constructed and a rain garden was constructed. So a flume was installed under the sidewalk to carry the excess weight water into the rain garden. Next slide, please. We underestimated the amount of water that would be coming from the private property. During rains, it was actually a very large amount of volume entering the rain garden and causing erosion of the mulch and the soils and uprooting the plants. To rectify the erosion problem, more rocks were added and the plants were spaced out as shown in this photo. Additional length of rocks reduced the exit velocity of the entering water, preventing the erosion. Next slide, please. In this photo, the large trees seen on the right side of the photo are at the bottom of a hill on Main Street. You can see in the photo that Main Street has a steep downward slope. The vertical drop in elevation is 20 feet. The project specifications required that the contractor to provide a 2-year warranty for the trees. The design included red oak tree species to be planted in these rain gardens. There were concerns expressed by the contractors that there could be, due to the steep slope, there could be standing water, and red oak tree species will not be able to tolerate standing waters for long periods of time. So to alleviate this concern, the species for the 9 trees in these swales were changed from red oak to bald cypress trees, which are more tolerant to standing water. Next slide, please. Challenge number 4 was at the rec center, where there was heavy washout during the rains. At the larger rain garden at the rec center parking lots, heavier rains were causing the mulch and the soil to get washed out and into the storm drain inlet. This is, I do not have a before picture, but it was causing a lot of dirt to get washed out to the storm drain inlet, and the storm inlet was getting filled up with mulch. This is actually an after picture, but you can still see that the mulch was getting washed up against the rock berm. Next slide, please. To mitigate this erosion problem, rock berms were added along the water's path around the inlet, and you can see further along that the rock berms added at frequent intervals to reduce the erosion. Next slide, please. This is another photo of the rain garden showing the added rock berms. Next slide, please. This is the end of the presentation. Thank you for your time. I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have at the end of the presentations.
All right, thank you very much, Sagar. That was very interesting. I appreciate you presenting that information.
Thank you.
Let's see, we are running quite a bit ahead of schedule right now, so we're in very good shape. We have had a lot of information downloaded on all of you right now. I'm going to go ahead and call a 10-minute break here and give you all a chance to absorb what you have heard and catch up on emails, take a break, get a drink, whatever you need to do. And we will come back here at about 11:15. Okay, so, and then we will continue on with our local examples of implementation. We have a couple of projects we'll be talking about from the city of Dallas. So we will see you at about 11:15. Thanks.
This is Brent Larson.
Thank
I'm
you, Sean.
signing off because I've got commitments for the rest of the day, but thanks for letting me sit in with you all this morning.
Thank you for joining us.
Hey, Sean, this is Don Rains. Can you hear me and see me?
Yes, Don, I can hear you, and let me see if I can see you.
I can see you.
Okay,
I can hear
good.
you.
We're in good shape, Don. Thank you.
Yay.
Thank you. I'll just stay right here.
Okay.
Project along and present this to everyone because I feel like, first of all, keep in mind this was designed in 2009 and 2010, so it actually is a pretty older history. But what I thought was very interesting about the Beckley Commerce Intersection project, and I hope you'll find it interesting as well, is that really, realistically, it was the stakeholders of West Dallas and North Oak Cliff had very much a lot to do with this design and as a complete and a Green Street project. So we do see it as a pilot project when it was first introduced, and I'll give you the background history. Next slide. So this is just the agenda, and I have 50 minutes to go over it, but I think it's important to understand the project background and the context. Then you'll have to understand we were asked, this is prior to working for the city of Dallas. I worked for a company called Wallace Robertson Todd here in Dallas. We were asked to do a corridor usage study, which was really trying to understand all the mobility options. Again, keep in mind that 2009. Then we got into complete street, and there's some diagrams and Green Street concepts. And then we got into the rain harvesting and landscape details. And I also want to give kudos to Mr. Fawad Jabbar, because he really helped me when we were just meeting back in 2009 and 10 to understand how rain harvesting works. Again, a very early project. And when you start something and there's very few details out there, a few resources, I had to draw a lot of what we learned in Philadelphia. Wallace Robertson Todd did the Green Plan Philadelphia and other projects in the West Coast. Let's keep going. Next slide. So again, the background in 2008 and 9, the Beckley Commerce Intersection was a sort of a flashpoint moment. Again, prior to my working for the city of Dallas, basically the stakeholders had demanded the city of Dallas to reject the plan. And so it was at a 95% CD level. Basically, if you can recall, before the Dallas Bike Plan, before Complete Streets Plan, a lot of the vocal people in West Dallas and North Oak Cliff were really voicing concerns. They wanted to make sure that bike planning was part of it, the Complete Streets was elevated. So I attended a public meeting like a lot of us, and basically they looked over and said, "Hey, you're working on the Trinity project. What's going on?" I said, "Well, we had just opened the Trinity Overlook, which is we'll go into that in a little bit. And yes, this will probably be a trailhead at some point in the future." With that was sort of the impetus of how to get things changed and think differently. Keep in mind, this area of Dallas is quite an industrial commercial area. So everything up until 2010 was focused on accommodating big trucks and all those things as well. So the idea of pedestrians and bicycles and all those things was still somewhat foreign. Next slide. So again, the context, just to give you an idea, and we showed the Trinity plan with the lakes back at that time, showing that basically the corridor usage study was to engage the stakeholders and to really understand the vision. The city asked that we really focus on, well, what exactly do they want? And really, what we had to do was find a way to make a commercial industrial area into a more walkable mixed use land use pattern, which is what PD 714 is written about, the area plan for this area. Next slide. Also, again, I mentioned about the Trinity project. At the time when I was working on that project, we realized that if we were to be successful and we were able to have the attractions that we would have, we could attract over 100,000 people on a beautiful Saturday. Sorry about that. Let me get a little water for me real quick. So again, this was the first trailhead. I had the job of looking in the overlook, and basically at this location, we thought that this was a place that people could access to the Trinity. Again, it was a very early trailhead. The Corps of Engineers, we had to put the shades up because we couldn't penetrate the levee, so we had to put it in a large bench and things like that to hold us in place. But just give you an idea of the background. So again, nothing at the Trinity in 2009 and 2008. People did not go there for any reason, and it has changed very gradually, but it has changed over the years. So basically there was a shift, and we had to think of how West Dallas could be utilized and how infrastructure could be thought of differently. Next slide. And this, I'll just go over this really quickly. We were just looking at what the possibilities were in West Dallas as far as what kind of mixed use pattern may arise from the Trinity project. Again, this is prior to the Margaret Hunt Hill Bridge. This is prior to Continental Bridge. And so we were just trying to get a good idea, grasping of what might be the future. Again, this is 2009, 2010. Next slide. So this is what it looked like. And the Beckley Commerce intersection was basically pretty nondescript. And let's go to the next slide and show what the plan looks like. Basically, I realize it's rather dull. It's a 1930 design when Commerce Bridge was constructed. You can see it's almost like an early version of a cloverleaf. People were to drive underneath Commerce. It's sort of a bypass. You'll notice there's a little bit of a ramp where the overlook is. So that ramp was actually constructed when they were doing the levee project in 1930, and they sort of kept it as sort of a construction ramp, but it was also used as a bypass. The stakeholders basically said, we want to make sure that handicapped people can get to the overlook. We want to make sure bicyclists and pedestrians can get to the overlook. Nothing that was designed prior to that was designed in that direction. Next slide. And then basically, we looked at the parcels, what's left, what land would be left if we were to put in the plan. You can see that we basically created a four-way intersection in our earlier concepts, and we wanted to know, and obviously they wanted to know what type of land use pattern would happen once the intersection is reconfigured. Next slide. So again, from West Dallas and from North Oak Cliff point of view, the community stakeholders were very strong in looking at complete streets. They wanted bike lanes, they wanted pedestrian refuge. They wanted to make sure that we could, again, respond with complete streets and green street features. They did not like wide turning curves for the trucks. They wanted to see if it was possible to have transit stops. Again, prior to Uber, prior to streetcars, we thought it would be a good opportunity to come up with designs that would encourage multimodal connectivity to the Trinity. And so those things were brought up, again, very early prior to all these things opening. Next slide. And then when it came to the Trinity itself, working on that as a landscape architectural firm, we basically wanted to make sure that sustainability was in the forefront. This, obviously, the intersection of Commerce and Beckley is a bit of a gateway, you might say, to Fort Worth Avenue. And so the stakeholders were also advocating best practices in design as far as using stormwater integration. Again, we're all new to this, so this was all uncharted territory at the time. So I took a photograph in Portland, Oregon. I thought it was interesting to see what rain gardens were about, and it was interesting to see what can we do as far as using irrigation and using stormwater runoff as hopefully as a primary irrigation source for the rain gardens. But obviously, we all know that we need the first few years to supplement that. So again, that was our choice, was complete and a green street, two different ways, and the convergence between the two. Next slide. And so that was the concept. When we showed this slide, it was just a SketchUp rendering, as you can see. We basically got in front of all the stakeholders and we reached a consensus. We reached a unanimous consensus, which wasn't always easy. There were some stakeholders that were very concerned that would slow things down. Methodist Hospital in particular was concerned that maybe this might impede ambulances. We understand that. So we try to make sure that the functionality worked for everyone involved, but that we had to balance everything as far as transportation, as far as pedestrian usage, and to really think about this intersection in a completely different way. Next slide. So that concluded the corridor usage study. And these are just really quick diagrams. These are just things from our public meeting. We wanted to show that first we had fine-tuned the design to where we had this nice four-way intersection. Next slide. I'm just going to show a few other things that were featured to this. We added the 11.5-foot sidewalks, which was part of the PD 714. We also had 15-foot wide crosswalks, and we want to make sure that there was an 8-foot pedestrian refuge in the median. Next slide. And adding to that, we want to make sure that there's enhanced pavement, timed signalization for pedestrians when they cross, and 18-foot curb radius turns, which I know is tough to come by. And it may have even shifted a little bit since this design. Next slide. Also, what's very unusual is we added these transit stops, something you'd see more in Europe than you would in Texas. But these little transit stops, even without the transit, again, if there's shuttles or big events at the Trinity, this is a place you can pull over, stop, get out, have ADA access back to the sidewalk. And basically, the bike lanes go between the transit stop. So the bike lanes, you'll see in the photographs, slip behind the transit stop itself. Again, we wanted to just create that opportunity, even prior to asking DART if we could use bus stops, but we do know that bus number 1 came through this area. So again, a transit stop, somewhat ambiguous, but designed for shuttles, even streetcars if possible. Next. Then we had obviously the cyclist amenities. We included 5-foot bike lanes with a 3-foot buffer. And next slide. We knew that we had issues when we crossed on the Union Pacific Railroad, that we had to basically have the bike lanes merge into the lane itself, just because we simply ran out of space. But we want to make sure that there's marked crossings at the intersection itself. The next slide. So other things we tried to do is also incorporate bike boxes. Unfortunately, it didn't happen, but at the same time that this was being designed, later on, commerce was being designed too. So other things, other markings and things came a little later. Next slide. So again, for access and parking, and some things have changed since this drawing from, again, 10, 15 years ago, or 10, 12 years ago. But we had slip lanes in the area, everything designed for commercial and industrial use. We also have that ramp that you see on the lower left that worked up to, I guess you might call it the Beckley ramp, that works its way up. And we realized that would be a good opportunity to have parking spaces there. And we counted 26 spaces if you were to do a head-end parking, because the lane itself is 40 feet wide. So, but then again, we did not want to encourage that bypass for people to drive and use the bypass in a fast way where the pedestrians are to get back onto Commerce going eastbound. Next slide. And that was what the stakeholders asked us specifically. This little diagram too for Green Street, I know it's a little unusual, but we wanted to show the area itself, the square footage of where the rainwater would come off the street from the median back to the rain gardens, estimated around 200 square feet roughly per tree. We'll get into those details in a little bit, but that's we want to just basically show to the public when we went to the stakeholders how that worked, how the stormwater worked, and was to help to be supplemental water to the trees. Next slide. These are just early renderings we did. I like to show rough sketches. I hope you don't mind. I know it's hard to read these, but we had to do our calculations and determine the spacing of the trees, the street trees. They roughly came out to 22 feet apart, and we realized that we needed to create a weir system because we're not on a flat street. We're on a street with a topographic change. So we had to make sure that we sort of stair-stepped our rain gardens from one cell to the next. And basically, they're designed to hold an inch and a half of rain before there's an overflow inlet. So again, we hold water just like they did in the city of Louisville, but we have to be able to let, after an inch and a half of rain, let the water overflow and go away. Next slide. Gets down into the details now. This image on the upper left is really just a project that was in progress in Kentucky. Did this little diagram to show really basically the profile of how the rain garden works. No surprise to you, you've seen these before, but this shows, at the time, shows how we used a PVC pipe at the bottom of the aggregate level to allow for the percolation flow to go out. Working our way up, there's a choker layer, and then very similar to what the city of Louisville did, we had a good mixture of different soil. Again, these are designed to be troughs, so they're designed to have water that holds there for a while. And next slide. We want to make sure that the functionality worked. We got into, again, these are just early landscape designs showing how the native plants and the trees work together. We had to make sure that the cells themselves were not too wide, that they didn't hold enough water, or too narrow, that they held too much water. So there's a little bit of a scale balancing act. Next slide. Sorry for my voice. So again, it does come down once you get the soil right, which is everything. Once you get the soil right and you get the percolation rate to work, and you make sure that you get the science to work well, you have to make sure that you choose the right plants, obviously. I did a lot of research and realized what's so interesting about bald cypress trees, even though we see them a lot here, is they are a floodplain tree. They can handle inundation of water quite a bit. And I've found that pretty much the other plants chosen were not just drought tolerant, but really flood tolerant. So you'll find these type of plants in the Trinity floodplain as well with the type of soil we have. It's important that you get the pH right with the soils that you choose. Cypress actually prefers a little more acidic soil. So I even got to the point where I didn't want the stones in the rain garden to be too alkaline so that the pH gets unbalanced. We want to make sure that we got the right soil composition, and that even the trees, even the cypress trees, find a way to, they're one of the better trees in the United States. They actually can pull heavy metals out of the ground. So it has a really good biofiltration capability, as well as what we see with blue stem switchgrass, cytosgrama, and Gulf muley. Next slide. Sorry about my voice. We also want to make sure that with the Trinity project itself, that we helped to elevate the signage program for wayfinding. So we also were using the City of Dallas bike signage system at the time to make sure that everything stays cohesive. Again, a year or two before the bike plan. Next slide. Also, you'll notice that we had our lighting system, again, with help with the identity of the Trinity project, to create areas for banners, as well as the LED lighting that you may be familiar with, and keeping with the blue and green theme of the brand identity itself. Next slide. So this is a before. We can go on to the next. In 2009, rather mundane. Next slide, please. This was the concept in 2011 and 12. If you notice, we graciously kept the 130-year-old pecan tree. We found out that that tree was planted by a German family that used to run a ferry across the Trinity River to downtown. Next slide. And then this is how it looks today. Probably not as good as my Photoshop, but that's okay. Again, those were drawn even before the bridge was built, so we had to get an idea of what it might actually look like. And let's just go through the slides to show what the images look like today. So this was completed in 2019. It took a few years. It was 4.7 million, I believe, total price. Next slide. And these, I've always learned it's good to take photographs right after a project is completed. So we wanted to show that you see the enhanced pavement, you see the benches and site furnishings package, as well as the crosswalk and the time to intersection signalization. Also places like for the bike racks and whatnot. Again, we want to make sure that this acted like a trailhead to the Trinity. Next slide. And then more in the details, you can see, again, very similar to what Lewisville has done. We also had the storm, these weir systems where the water would rush into the larger aggregates and just basically allowed to percolate downward, again, with the native plants. It's a little bit smaller of a rain garden than you see some places, but again, in an urban environment, you only can get so much you can in these spaces. Next slide. Oh, I'm sorry. Actually, Sean, before you change it, the slide on the upper left shows the transit, the little transit stop. I want to make sure y'all took note of that the bike lane works around it. And then you have the little stop there with 2 rain gardens on both sides. Next slide. And this is, again, you see the Trinity signage on the upper left. And since 2019, there's been some construction. The Langenford project has been built in this area. I see that they also needed to include street trees as part of the PD project. So there are some other trees that are neighboring with the rain gardens themselves. But it's nice to see, considering how, I wouldn't say that the Green Complete Street completely transformed the area, but I do think that infrastructure has a way of creating, I guess you might say, informed development in a sense. So it's nice to see a mixed use development response from that being constructed currently. Next slide. So that's implementation itself. I think it's interesting that we learned some lessons. There are some things that we may have been able to do a little bit better, but we can discuss that in the Q&A. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you so much, Don. Great project. It's very interesting.
Thank you.
Yes, so we will continue on with our final presentation for this section, and then we have some time before lunch to address questions and provide some answers. So our next presentation is going to be discussing Elm Street improvements and green infrastructure techniques that were incorporated there. Chris Turner Noteware will be presenting. She's the city engineer for the city of Dallas. She oversees the Engineering Interagency and Survey Division of the Public Works Department. She also oversees execution of the Capital Bond Program for the Public Works Department and interagency transportation projects. She previously spent 22 years also in the state of Arizona, working in both the public and private sectors. So Chris, go ahead and take it away.
All right, thank you, Sean. If you can go to the next slide, please. So today I'll be doing a presentation on our Elm Street between Good Latimer and Exposition project. And just to talk about what we're going to be speaking on today. First, I'll talk about the project location, then the background, then the reconstruction concept. We had sidewalk paving in the project, planting beds and rain gardens, and lighting. I'll talk a little bit about the maintenance. And then we'll show some post-construction photos of shortly after construction, several years after construction, and then current day. And then we'll do a summary on the project. Next slide, please, Sean. So the location of the project, basically, as I mentioned, is on Elm Street between Good Latimer and Exposition. And you can see that on the map here. It's in Deep Ellum. And just as a note, Main Street, immediately south of Elm, we're actually just starting to work with Deep Ellum Foundation on some construction of sidewalk improvements in this area. And in about a year to year and a half or so, we'll actually be starting to work on Commerce as well, doing construction between Good Latimer and Exposition. So we're definitely not done with our improvements in this area. Next slide, please, Sean. So as background on this project, Elm Street was a very broad one-way street. It had limited sidewalk area and very little landscaping. You can see that in the lower left photo down here. It's an eclectic area. It was in transition from service industries. It had a lot of residential, and it was going to restaurant and clubs. There was a desire by the residents and the owners to make more pedestrian-friendly areas and add enhancements. And there's a lot of impervious area with downstream stormwater capacity constraints. So the picture on the right was a vision of what the roadway would ultimately look like if it was converted to two-way traffic and had lighting and landscape improvements. Next slide, please. So the reconstruction concept that was proposed was to change Elm Street from a one-way to a two-way street. We wanted to increase the sidewalk areas in front of the businesses to provide them more area for sidewalk dining and also just more area for pedestrians in general. We wanted to increase the parallel parking areas, provide enhanced crosswalks at the intersections, and also provide stormwater conservation through pervious pavements and amended planters and rain gardens. We wanted to increase landscaping in general in the area. And as I mentioned, enhance those pedestrian accommodations through sidewalk dining, provide ADA access and bicycle access, and then also improve lighting in the area. And you can see from the picture to the right, this is one of these areas that we managed to do that within the project area. Next slide, please, Sean. So for the sidewalk paving, what we did was we utilized a broom finished concrete band and walk section next to the buildings. And you can see that in particular in the bottom right photo, as you can see that concrete band right next to the buildings. So what that did is it allows for expansion and remodel of the shop fronts so that people have area to walk there. It diffuses the runoff that's coming off. We used pavers on accent bands along the parallel parking and at intersection bulb outs in the main intersections. And you can see that as well on some of these pictures. So that provides accent colors and patterning. So there is some visible difference on what's happening there. It provides a transition slope from the walk to the curb section. And as you can see in the lower left picture, it also provides areas for benches and congregation. And that middle picture shows one of those crosswalks that we're talking about here. Next slide, please, Sean. And then also on the sidewalk paving, we did some ISWIM and some LID, which is low impact development applications. We used larger size permeable pavers at the intersection bulb outs or between the drives for the trees. And you can see that in the picture to the right. And what this does, essentially the runoff, the stormwater runoff is treated and our total suspended solids are captured. We reduce our irrigation needs by creating partial retention. The tree provides canopy shading. It helps promote healthy root growth. And it also provides shade for pedestrians along the roadway. And it also creates a healthy aesthetic. It makes it just more visibly pleasing for everyone along the route. And on the bottom here are a couple of the details that were used for the tree plantings, basically showing how the soil goes around the tree roots and then how we have inspection vent pipes and things of that nature so that we can look and see what's happening underneath the soil. So again, basically trying to create these sections and areas where we have the trees interacting with the paving, interacting with the buildings, so that basically we can create a very aesthetic experience for folks that are using this area and going down Elm Street and Deep Ellum. Next slide, please, Sean. Then we're also creating planting beds and rain gardens in the area. Because this area is so heavily used, we had heavy compacted urban dirt and old road subbase at the new planter areas. And traditionally how this had been treated or would be treated is we would bring in some topsoil and amend that dirt at the surface for the planting beds. And what we really needed to do was do some urban dirt remediation to create soil for plants to grow in. Next slide, please, Sean. So again, with the ISWIM and the LID application on the planting beds, we needed to create planter beds with healthy soil. So what we did is we removed the road subbase down to natural subsoils. Those subsoils were ripped very deeply to basically make sure that they were very loose. We amended those soils in stratified layers by introducing topsoil and expanded shale and a mature finished compost. So this soil structure was restored for planting. It increased the permeability and the infiltration. And you can see the various pictures on the bottom to see what exactly was introduced into the soil to create this permeability and the infiltration. Next slide, please. And for the plant materials, we did use native plants because basically you can see from the graphic on the bottom, the root systems of the non-native plants are very, very shallow. So what we wanted to do was use native plants so that they have deeper roots for the drought tolerance, so we have less irrigation needs. It provides more infiltration in the soil. So the plants are also adapted to our regional rain provisions, and they're adapted to dry and wet immersed locations, which helps to create the atmosphere that we're looking for in these planter beds. Next slide, please, Sean. So in the rain gardens themselves, in the I Swim in the Lid application, we use depressed areas for the rain gardens wherever possible. The runoff is captured and treated through phytoremediation. 85% of the rain gardens are infiltrating, and the subdrainage is added to 10% of the rain gardens due to subsoil issues, and the irrigation is reduced. So you can see on the upper right, we do have 4 bays that basically allow the runoff to come into the rain gardens. And you can see that a little bit on the lower left as well. And that's how the water actually gets into the rain gardens. And then we have the plantings in there and the trees, etc. And you can kind of see a little bit through the process of time how those rain gardens were growing. And as far as the lighting, we did change from high pressure sodium to metal halide. Not exactly sure why we didn't go to LED on this, as I wasn't here when the project was ongoing, but we did change those lights over. Metal halide does provide a fuller color range of light to the colors of the buildings and the plantings and the pavements. And it also helps with restaurants so their foods look a little bit more appealing. We modified the pole and we added a reflector. And it does deliver the lighting where needed. So we do provide light levels for the heavy night use in the district. And it provides additional security, retail visibility on the sidewalk and roadway pavement surfaces. And you can see from the diagrams on the left, the existing fixture was out there, was a 16-foot metal pole. It didn't have any reflectors. And the new fixture that we put in was a 13-foot spun concrete pole that had a reflector. And it also has banner arms because this, again, is in the deep Ellum Foundation area. And there are things that they like to display on banners and things like that, that they didn't have that opportunity previously. Next slide, please, Sean. So for a maintenance aspect, maintaining the landscaping after construction is complete and allowing for establishment, we did provide a 2-year maintenance contract, which held the plant replacement warranty. And then the Deep Ellum Foundation took over the maintenance responsibility after that 2-year maintenance contract. The use of the deeply amended soils, the rain gardens, and the permeable pavers for the potable water reduction did help with needing less irrigation. And you can see the bottom pictures were pretty shortly after construction. So we had good rain gardens and good trees. And next slide, please. So looking at some of the photos shortly after construction, this was probably, this was May of 2016 when these photos were taken. You can see that the rain gardens were very lush. You know, the greenery was wonderful. Everything was very clean and very taken care of. Everything looked wonderful. You could see one of the Deep Ellum banners on the light poles that I was talking about. And, you know, it's a very, very nice, clean looking project. Next slide, please, Sean. So several years after construction, it looks a little bit different, as you can see. What we found in several areas, in particular in the areas that had a lot of heavy restaurant and bar areas, were that the rain garden areas were being trampled by a lot of heavy foot pedestrian traffic, which is what you can see in those bottom photos. We found that a lot of the 4 bays were getting clogged and plugged with sediment and litter, as you can see in that lower right photo. In the left photo, we actually had folks that were running into our irrigation controllers and things of that nature. So a lot of things that were happening, we were starting to get a lot of citizen complaints over basically the lack of plant material in the rain gardens and things like that. So moving on to the next slide, here are what things look like current day. The upper left photo, you can see the trees are doing well in the planters, but if you look closely, you can see there are a lot of cigarette butts and things like that that are embedded within the permeable pavers. In the lower left photo, if you look closely, you can see some subsidence in the permeable pavers, and we also have, some utility work going on. In the upper right photo, you can see some more of the trash and things like that are in the forebays. And the lower right photo, you can see that the rain garden itself is doing well, but the tree is having some issues. And that particular rain garden is an area that doesn't have a lot of restaurants and bar area. So the rain gardens themselves aren't getting trampled, but we are still having a little bit of issues with maintaining the actual plant material itself. And then the next slide shows some more of the current day. The upper left shows a rain garden that's doing much better, but it does have a little bit of area on the front that is getting walked over. In some of the rain garden areas, we have just flat out had to pull out the vegetation just because it has been trampled and destroyed. So you can see that in the upper right, we've just replaced it with the brown landscape gravel. In the lower left, we've replaced it with the black Tejas gravel. And in that lower right, you can kind of see an area that is a mixture of people that have trampled the rain garden and other areas that's not. And you can also kind of see the debris and things like that in the forebay area. So next slide, please, Sean. Kind of as a summary, as far as the project elements that went into the project, we had a lot of extensive landscaping and rain gardens. There are a lot of wide and upgraded sidewalks, a lot of improvement with ADA accessibility. There's traffic calming and indented parking, enhanced traffic calming and crosswalks. We added landscape and pedestrian paving bulb outs, designated concrete walkways adjacent to the buildings, and the permeable pavers over the structural soil for tree planting and root development, and then the ice swim and the lid applications. Some of the challenges and things that we've learned, one of the main ones is choosing the correct material for the correct location. One of the first things that we discovered was essentially having the plant material, the low-lying shrubs and the things of that nature and the native grasses adjacent to areas that have restaurants and bars where people can walk over them is not the best plant palette to have in that area. So those are some of the lessons learned, is making sure that we're fully cognizant of what activities are occurring next to those rain gardens and making sure that we put the appropriate plant material so that they don't get walked over. Making sure that we have an adequate maintenance agreement. Some folks in the Deep Ellum Foundation at the time weren't really supportive of the project, so we have not necessarily had all of the maintenance that should be out there. And then, of course, you have citizen complaints. The project, when you first put it out there, looks great and everybody's happy with it. But when, of course, you start getting the trash out there and, the plants that aren't necessarily, performing the way you would like them to, the first thing that starts happening is you start getting all sorts of complaints. And trying to deal with those and then deal with the maintenance agreements at the same time can be a bit of a challenge. So making sure that everybody is fully in partnership and fully committed to the project is always very helpful. And that is one of those challenges that you need to deal with before you get involved in one of these projects. But with that, we love our Deep Ellum Foundation partners. We love these projects, and we're continuing to move on with our Main Street and our Commerce Street projects. And we'll continue to work on improving the plant materials and the things that we do on these projects. And with that, thank you for allowing me to present this project.
Wonderful. Thank you, Chris, for that presentation and especially sharing your challenges and lessons learned. So we can all learn moving forward. We have a few minutes, about 5 minutes for questions and answers at this time before we break for lunch. So I know we have a number of questions in our chat. Sydney, can you go and run through those, please?
Yeah, so the first question, I believe this was directed for you, Christina, is do you replace the plants once they get overgrown, add their maintenance to the city mowing and lawn care, or do you plant dwarf plants?
Chris, if you're talking, we can't hear you.
Oh, I apologize. I accidentally muted myself.
Okay.
Basically, the maintenance on these projects should be going to adjacent property owners, or in this case, the Deep Ellum Foundation. So we are not adding their maintenance to city mowing and lawn care. I don't have a good answer on the plant replacement once they get overgrown. I can definitely get answers on that and get them back through COG to the attendees on that.
Okay, great. We received a few other questions directed for you, Chris. First, do you have a plant list that you could share of what native plants you went with or what was preferred for this project?
Absolutely, we can get that and provide that as well.
Great, okay. Another question I'm seeing regarding your project is what was the foundation doing to help with the maintenance and trash issue, if anything?
We basically were coordinating with Deep Ellum Foundation to get these issues taken care of, but we did not have a very strong maintenance agreement. So it's something that we just need to work hand in hand with the foundation on. And they're a great partner with us. So it's something that we've been working hand in hand to address.
Great. Another question for you. Someone suggested maybe implementing a fencing to prevent trampling of the rain gardens. Were these options considered rather than not replanting the beds?
There are always other options, but then you have to consider the tripping hazards and things like that, understanding that these beds are adjacent to areas that have restaurants and bars. So there are safety issues associated with that as well. So there are definitely other options that we considered.
Okay, great, thank you. Also, can you provide any feedback regarding the city's thoughts on screening portions of the rain garden areas to limit disruption on the areas? I believe you
and that's
that, yeah.
Yeah, and that's kind of a similar answer in terms of needing to consider the safety of people as well. We don't want to create a tripping hazard as we're, protecting plant material. So there are things that we will consider on future projects on how we plant and what type of plant material we put in these areas.
Great, thank you. Sean, I believe those are all of the questions that I'm seeing in the chat.
I think there's one more that was for Chris's presentation. It says, do you replace plants once they're overgrown, add their maintenance to city mowing and lawn care, or plant dwarf plants?
And one thing I can add to that, we typically trim the plants if they're grasses, as opposed to replacing them.
Okay, thank you. Yes, Sydney, I think there are some additional questions directed to Cyber's presentation.
Oh, yes. So, yeah, referring back to Sagar's presentation, we did receive questions such as how do you deal with drought periods and keeping the vegetation and trees alive? And how often are the mulch and rocks maintained? Sagar did answer these in the chat box. I'll read them out for everyone. He stated that irrigation is included in the rain gardens as well as to provide water during drought periods. The trees are irrigated at this time until they grow for a few years. And then to keep the curb cuts and rocks clear of debris, the Parks Department at Lewisville have a maintenance program to clean every 2 to 3 months. Sagar said he was going to check with the Parks Department on how often they replace the mulch. And it looks like they are, the Parks Department does weed the Old Town area every 3 to 4 weeks, and then mulch is planned to be replaced annually.
Oh, there was one other question for you, Sagar, about weeding of the beds. Who takes care of that, or how does that work? Part of your maintenance program, I guess.
Our Parks Department takes care of the beds. The Main Street and Mill Street being in the Old Town area, being in a high profile area, our Parks manager was saying that they go out, once every 4 weeks to check on the weeds and clear any debris.
Okay. All right, good questions, everybody. Sydney, are there any additional questions or any hands raised out there?
I'm not seeing any.
Okay. Well, I think at this time it is 12:01, so we'll go ahead and break for lunch. Everybody go and take a break, get some lunch. And please join us again at 1 o'clock. We'll start right at 1 p.m. So look forward to continuing our afternoon session. Thanks, everybody.
Hold on.
Go ahead. Sorry about that.
That's okay. No worries. That gets used a lot for the soil volume / stormwater projects, where we maybe need to do some layering of void space, maybe some aggregate, and then the actual soil media that's going to act as the filtration media for the stormwater. So that keeps the system flexible. What you're looking at here is just one unit. These get stacked next to each other with a little bit of space between them to create a sea of open, uncompacted or lightly compacted soil for your trees and to accept that stormwater. So the big idea here is we can't have big open tree pits like we'd like for our trees, or we can't always fit bio-retention systems in our parking lots or in our streetscapes. So this is a way to do all of that under pavement and still be able to grow large trees and also filter and store water. This will become a little more apparent when I go to some of the next slides. So yeah, if we can go ahead and move to the next slide. Thank you. A lot of people don't know this, but you actually need a lot of soil to grow a big tree. So some studies have been done all over the world. We sort of compiled those studies and put together a soil chart for how large a tree will grow based on the soil volume. And I'm going to talk a lot about soil volume, and that's what you can determine as far as getting a tree to a certain size. It helps designers understand, how's this project going to look in 10 or 20 years, as opposed to what's it going to look like on day one. We're not really that interested in the first day. We want these trees to grow and create sort of those after photos that everybody's looking for. So the gray or green line is the soil volume line. So if you kind of look to the left, you can see the canopy diameter, for instance, of a 32-foot canopy. We need around 800 cubic feet of soil. So the number on the bottom. A typical 4 foot by 4 foot tree opening gives you about 50 cubic feet of soil. So you can tell you know, we've been really underserving our trees by giving them only 50 cubic feet of soil in a 4x4 tree pit. So why do we want big trees? Well, big trees intercept stormwater, they shade our cities, they create wildlife habitats, all the things that you probably already know. But the biggest thing is just even in stormwater interception in the leaves of the tree, we can hold up to 0.8 of an inch of stormwater. And that's something engineers don't give us a lot of credit for with our trees. The roots of the trees hang on to soil that is otherwise often washed away in big storms. So, you know, besides just the soil that we're providing for the trees themselves are intercepting a lot of water and helping in that way. So, you know, every time we clear a site to put up a building, we're taking away that stormwater function. The blue line that you're taking a look at the bottom, that is really just the amount of stormwater that you can hold in that soil volume. So again, if you look at the 1,000 cubic feet of soil at the bottom, 20% of that, or 200 cubic feet, is available for stormwater to be just held up in the soil pores. That is a lot more than you're going to get in some compacted soil, correct? Compacted soil is really not soil. It doesn't really give you any environmental benefits, doesn't provide any ecological services to your city. So using something like the Silvacell or soil cells is opening up that soil and allowing you the design function to just for the soil to just be soil, if that makes sense. So seems kind of crazy that we have to go through these huge leaps to provide soil, but the engineers, they're not going to let you build a sidewalk, a road, a plaza on nice, loose, fluffy soil. So the Silvacell does all the heavy lifting so that the soil in the cells can just be there to function like it should in nature. Next slide. So we designed this system to, of course, take traffic loading. And the reason for that is because not, you know, the world, as much as we'd like it to be pedestrian only, it's got cars, it's got buildings. And so we had to build our system to that load rating. So what you're looking at here is kind of a cutaway of a parking lot, and the Silvacells below. Thank you. Thank you, person, Laura. I couldn't see myself, so thank you. Is that better? Everybody? Somebody? Thank you. Okay, thanks, Laura. So, thanks. Yeah, so what you're looking at here is just an animation of what a parking lot might look like. That dark gray strip could be permeable pavers to let some water in. We could have curb cuts in those tree cutouts to let water in that way. We could have some kind of an overflow where water comes into the Silvacell system. So I'm going to talk a little bit later about all the ways you can actually get water in. So you can do all the things that you would do in open bioretention, except now it's under the pavement. So you're not losing all those parking spots. You don't have to have those big 10-foot by 20-foot islands that trees never really grow in anyway. Our goal is to shrink down the size of parking lots. So we can still have trees, but we don't need to give them so much open space. That alone is a huge cost savings and a land savings that before now was just impossible. So we had years of arborists telling us we need more soil for our trees. We need bigger tree pits. We need bigger tree islands. Well, that's great, except that takes up your land. And as your land gets more expensive, these kinds of systems make a lot more sense. That we need to stack our services. We can do our bioretention, we can grow our trees, we can still park cars, and we don't need to do those all in 3 separate areas of our parking lot or our plaza. So that is really the ultimate goal here. I mean, we all love the look of open bioretention systems. Rain gardens can be very beautiful, but they take up a lot of land, and that's really the what we're talking about here. So passive irrigation also is something that we kind of forget to talk about. Is, you know, the more water we can get into the system, the trees can handle it. As long as you've got an underdrain and a way to get that water back out, then the tree can handle it. Next slide, please. So here's our sort of traditional bioswale rain garden area, which cool, that's great. I love the idea that everyone gets to see that, hey, we're doing, you know, interesting things in our city or in our parking lots. If you've got the space, great. If land is cheap, great. But they do take up space that you can't really do anything else. Nobody can walk there, nobody can park there. You've got to have, you know, you got to take care of the maintenance, and you've got to clean out the suspended solids from this system. It depends on, you know, what's in your stormwater, what it's picking up, but nothing wrong with them if you've got all those ingredients, all those maintenance people to do the work. But if you don't, and you still want to do really cool systems and take care of surface water off of your parking lot, then you know, this to me looks like we could probably get about 20 more parking spaces, and we could still have all of our shade trees. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. So here we are. Now we have a 4x4 tree opening, but we're still able to capture all that water and bring it in under the pavement and do treatment, do storage, all your flow control, and also passively irrigate your trees. And you can see at the bottom right that we still do have an under drain, but that water is going to be a lot cleaner, and it's going to slow that water down during heavy rains, and then be able to redirect it into your storm sewer, or if you're storing it in a tank for other kinds of use, that water is going to be a lot cleaner than when it went into that catch basin or came down through your pervious paving. So we are kind of showing a couple of different ways to get water in. One, like I said, is through permeable pavement. Just comes in nice and even, evenly distributing that water into the open soil pores. Or you can bring it into a catch basin that's just your traditional catch basin, put a distribution pipe out of your catch basin into the silvacells, somewhere near the top of the soil, hopefully, so that water can run down through the soil profile, and then have it taken off in your under drain. You can also use a trench drain. Curb cuts are sometimes used to bring water in. Anything you can probably come up with, we'll approve. Lots of ways to get water in, and lots of ways to get water out. So that is sort of the big idea. I think our next slide goes directly into San Jacinto. Oh, nope, I have one more. Thank you. So this is just really another cutaway, another animation showing those blue arrows bringing water into a permeable pavement strip, bringing water down into the silvacells, and then that big continuous trench of soil is there available for the trees. So again, we're not losing any parking spots. We're passively irrigating the trees, and we're treating the stormwater and keeping it on site. So again, let's do as many of those services as we can in the same area rather than having to have all these, different systems spread out all over the parking lot. I know I've been to Texas a few times. Obviously, it's so hot there. I live in Atlanta, but Texas is hotter. We're all looking for the shady spot, right, to park. So let's try to have shade for every car, and keep our parking lots and our sidewalks and plazas cool. I wish I could ask questions right now, but we'll wait till the end. So keep your questions, and I'm sticking around. And I think we're going to talk about San Jacinto Plaza next. So I'll take the next slide. So San Jacinto Plaza is in Rockwall, Texas. It's an old kind of historic town that is growing, and they did a capital improvement tax to go ahead and do this project. It's about a $9 million project. So it's not super huge, but it makes a big impact on this town and its downtown. They really are focusing on connectivity and walkability, getting people out into the community. So this space was designed as an event space, really, for people to come out. There's restaurants lining this, and there's also a little stage you'll see, lighting, so it feels safe, and it's a pedestrian only type of street. They do have times in like for deliveries and stuff where things can be delivered, but what you're seeing here is them excavating out for the silva cells and compacting the base so that they can go ahead and start building the system up and filling it with soil. So this is basically going to be filled with soil, uncompacted soil that's then available for the trees. So we'll take the next slide. Here we have the bases in on that compacted smooth base. We have a 2X, well, this is our old system. We actually are in our second generation of the silva cells, but this is a 2 stack system. And then you can see the geogrid kind of surrounding this product to act as a interface between the uncompacted soil and going back to compacted outside of the silva cell zone. You're also seeing a utility pipe coming through. We can't exactly ignore utilities. They exist underground, so having as much void space and open space to run those utilities through is very, very important. Go ahead to the next slide. This is skipping a little bit to the completed project, and you can see the stage. The pavers act as permeable brick pavers, so water does get down through there and into the soil volume. The trees are banking the right and left side of the corridor. So this was previously, which is kind of cool, this was previously an alleyway that went behind all of the restaurants. So they made this kind of the new front with outdoor dining and seating and all that. So it was a lot easier to make this into a pedestrian space, but it's something that I don't think very many cities think of, is trying to make an alleyway into an attractive, inviting place. This project was done by a firm called Latera Studios. They're out of Dallas. They're a fairly small office, but Chris Brown is super creative, and he's going out to a lot of these smaller cities and creating these great spaces for them. He also did a project in Rowlett, Texas, another place you don't hear about too much. Go into the next slide and we'll see the final slide for this project. Yeah, so obviously attractive. Look at all those people, big shade trees. The trees were planted in 2007, and these photos were taken in 2012. So I haven't been able to get back there since then. It's a little bit off the beaten path, but I can only imagine how this space looks now when it's mature. I thought it was really smart that they built all these seat walls to kind of surround the planters, to just even give more seating for people in a shady environment. Again, all of the pavers that you're seeing around these trees are letting water in through the actual cracks in the pavers themselves. So that's how the water is getting in, and then it is under drained to let that water out. I'm going to talk a second. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So Sundance Square, I imagine maybe more of you have been to Sundance Square. The total project of the Sundance area has been going on for about 30 years as far as it's from planning to inception. But the Sundance Square itself, this huge plaza, was basically taken, built over 2 existing surface parking lots. So they took those 2 parking lots and then transformed them, and then built around that square, put historic door like faces on those so that it actually looks kind of like the Wild West. And of course, restaurants and shops moved into all those. The idea of this design was to create a double LA, 2 different Bosque areas. And basically the designer, Michael Ferguson's office, their goal was to grow large trees that were connected to basically create a ceiling effect in these 2 bosques. I love some of these installation photos because you can see the trees were not small when they started. They of course wanted some immediate impact, but the silvocels then were just built right up to the trees. The reason for this is that there isn't going to be paving per se. The paving is going to be decomposed granite, which is automatically a pervious surface to let water in. Let's go to the next slide, please. So this is just a little bit further into the actual installation. Some of the silvocels are filled before and then at the very back, you can see that there's some that even have decks on them. The boxes have been taken off of the trees. So basically in this scenario, we are putting the silvocels as close as we can up to the box part of the root ball. And then we're going to come in with geotextile and geogrid on top. I'm just looking at your question. How do you eliminate the top? Uh-oh, I lost your question. I'll keep talking and then resend it.
We will revisit all the questions in our question and answer session as well.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, basically what you're seeing is in the foreground, you're seeing the silvocels before there's soil. Oh, thank you. And then we're going to fill that entire thing with uncompacted soil. The only thing they're going to do is walk through it. So they're going to get foot compaction, and then they're going to put a deck over the top that then protects that soil from future compaction. So in this project, because it's such a high traffic plaza, part of the reason for using the silvocels was to eliminate compaction. I mean, there's plenty of plazas with DG where they don't use silvocels. but when you start to have thousands of people walk over it, that soil does become compacted, and that's what they're trying to avoid here. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So here we are. Those are the decks. Decks, lids, permanent tops, whatever you want to call them. And then that soil below is completely protected. You can walk over this now. You can't really drive over it at this point until the final paving is on, but this is what's going to protect all of that soil from becoming compacted in the future. Trying to remember what year this was, 2013, I think. Okay, go ahead. Oh, okay, you're welcome. So this is a drone photograph, obviously, but all the trees that are on the right in that big, long double alley are in silvacells. You saw how much soil they were getting. I want to tell you the number. I think it was 1,200 cubic feet of soil per tree. This is a lot of soil. And let's go to the next slide. This is after just 2 growing seasons. It's a little bit early in the year, so the trees haven't completely leafed out, but you can start to get a sense of how the trees really did not go through any kind of transplant shock. And the designer, in order to get even more water into the system other than just what's going to fall right on the DG, has a slight slope that brings water slowly in from the surrounding pavement, which I think is something we should do for like every tree pit, every tree opening, every planter, is have our slopes go towards the planters so that we can capture sidewalk, plaza water, even road water. So yeah, like I said, this is just 2 growing seasons in, and then go ahead and go to the next slide. This was 4 growing seasons in. This is the last time I was at the site and was able to get photos. I understand that they've moved a lot of the tables and chairs under the shady part of the tree, which makes so much more sense to invite people into that shady environment. Again, by bringing all that storm water in and intercepting water from the trees, really we're not losing a lot of water out through the under drain. So much of it actually gets caught up in the soil itself. I think this is the last slide. So with that, if you want to, oh, I keep lying to you. I'm sorry. It's hard when I don't control my own slides. Here was just from one of these massive shade structures. I was actually at an event in Fort Worth. It was an ASLA conference. And so I was able to get some nice shots with people in the photos, which is always kind of nice to see that people go to these places. Let's see if there's one more slide. Nope, that was the end. So I guess we'll take your questions at the end. Hopefully we'll have some questions and discussion, but thank you everyone for listening. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Brenda. That was great. Really appreciate that.
Thank you. Do I need to go off of?
Yeah, if you could mute yourself, that would be great. You can leave your video on if you want. It's up to you. Thank you. All right, we have another presentation in this theme. Here we have currently going of pavements and surfaces. So we are going to have a presentation on the green at College Park. We have David Hoffman joining us from UTA. He is an associate professor in the graduate program in landscape architecture at UTA since 2004. He has been energetically pursuing a faculty role bridging practice and research. He teaches courses reflecting interests in landscape aesthetics, critical regionalism, plants, planting design, and ecologically and environmentally performative landscapes. He is a research associate at the Botanical Research Institute in Texas, of Texas in Fort Worth, and he was also instrumental in the early development of the Sustainable Sites Initiative, which you'll hear about a bit today, the landscape equivalent of the popular LEED certification program for buildings. Okay, why don't you go ahead and take it away, David? David, if you're speaking, we're not hearing you. You are muted currently. Okay, just 1 second. We're having a little bit of a technical difficulty here. See if we can fix that.
There we go.
Okay, great.
Yeah, I was
Sorry
locked
about
out.
that, David.
Okay, so the next challenge will, I still need to be able to share my screen, remember?
Yes, you should be able to do that. Have you tried that yet?
Yep, it says, oh, I see. That'll say, okay, it say stop the other screen sharing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry. Okay, so that's my screen. You guys can see my
Okay.
screen, correct?
Very good, yes.
Okay, so I just have to, there we go. Does that look good?
Yep.
All
That's
right.
good. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Brenda. That was very interesting. I always tell my students about the deep root systems, and it's always fascinating. And it's great seeing those pictures of Fort Worth. And also want to thank Sydney Steelman and Sean and Conrad and Barbara Walsh, all the people that helped pull this together. So my talk is maybe a little bit off topic, but I'm a little, as a person, I'm a little off topic. So that's all par for the course. I'm going to talk a little bit about Sustainable Sites Initiative, just a few seconds, and then a little bit about the green at College Park. And then I'll focus a little more intensely on one of the innovative permeable paving systems that we use there. So for those of you who don't know where the green at College Park is, it's basically in the center of Arlington, right on the east side of the UTA campus. There, Abrams Street is here and Park Row, and anyway, so it's basically in the center of Arlington. And it was actually the first mixed use project built in downtown Arlington in something like 50 years. So Arlington was one of the very last cities to start developing with mixed use projects. And the university just decided to go ahead and do it themselves. Now there have been a number of projects that have been built. Paris Rutherford and others are starting to finally get on the bandwagon. But so we're going to be focusing on this area over here, the green at College Park. Let me start my timer. Otherwise, I'm a professor, I can talk for days. So here you can see a computer model that was done by Strickle Rollins, which is now Park Hill. And I do need to acknowledge them as the designers of both the landscape and the civil engineering. So they did a great job working together on that. Of course, UTA is the owner, and this project would not have been possible without a significant grant from the NCT COG. So credit where credit's due. This was designed as a stormwater green piece of stormwater green infrastructure. So you can see here, the plan gives you, the best spatial arrangement. The water is basically flowing from right to left, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So the Green at College Park was 2.6 acres, and it is a native and adaptive garden, but fully accessible so people can enjoy it. It predominantly functions as a sustainable rain garden system, and it does that really well. And we'll talk about some of those details. And it does use some native plants, but also a lot of non-native plants. And you can see all the wonderful things that it was designed to do. And this is the part of the list that we use to get sustainable site certification. The reducing potable water, it's reduced it by more than 50%. Lots and lots of stormwater features, native and adaptive plants, reducing urban heat island, et cetera, et cetera. So it really is the greenest thing that we have on our campus. And it was one of the first 3 projects worldwide to get sustainable site certification. And that was a really big deal. It was really hard because, you know, the system was being developed. It's kind of like being the first LEED building. You know, sustainable sites is like LEED if you don't know about it. And it's structured the same way, and it's owned by the same company, GCBI. And as we were getting certified, we were working through the systems. How do you get a project certified? And you know, what are the criteria? And I was also involved in writing the first test for the to become a sites AP, just kind of like a LEED AP. So it's very similar to LEED. And you can see this the prerequisites and the credits are set up in a kind of a similar way to LEED. Obviously, this project got a lot of points in water, soils, and vegetation, but it also got points in materials, human health, construction, operations. It got points in everything. But the soils and vegetation and water were probably the biggest points. So this is where we started. And I have this little list from Elena Berg, who actually, I don't know if she's still at NCT COG, but she was when she put this together. So we had removed the tree canopy, we removed the ground cover vegetation, we had compacted soil, all the things that you would think are wrong with a site. This site was definitely that. And you can see it at the top. It was basically old beat up apartments, parking lots. And now at the bottom here, there's still one big parking lot there on the upper left-hand corner. I guess you can see my cursor. But this project, even though it looks like it has a relatively small footprint, it actually processes 1/3 of all the water on the UTA campus, 460-acre campus. So in that sense, it is transportation green infrastructure, because all the water coming off the parking lots and streets and everything from 1/3 of the campus all comes into there on a 100-year storm event and gets processed. So it really is a very robust 3-acre piece of green infrastructure. And I'm a big believer in plants, and not just for environmental issues, but also for ecology, also for human amenity. We know that plants lower people's blood pressure, and we certainly need that nowadays, right? I know my blood pressure's up with all the problems we have. So when we need trees, but we also need understory. The understory is the way people experience a lot of greenery. And so the Sustainable Sites Initiative has this thing called the Biomass Density Index, which not everybody's aware of. If you want to find out more about this, just Google Sustainable Sites Initiative. They have tons of information on all these things. They have ways to calculate it. They have all the studies, the rationale for everything. It really is a great primer in all the different things that you can do to make a landscape what I call future viable. And you can see we started out with hardly any trees with understory. And without hardly any, shrubs or herbaceous ground cover or, anything. And we had sorry, my this is cut off here. Yeah. So the biomass density index was 0.74. If you just look at this trees with understory, 580 square feet, and then look, it went up to 31,000 square feet. So that's quite a change. And the biomass density index went up to 3.4. So we got 8 points. So the Sustainable Science Initiative is difficult to get certified, but it really pushes everybody to do the right thing. So I think it's really valuable in that sense. We also did look at the solar reflectance index here. You can see concrete pavers, SRI over 29. So we tried to keep all the materials above 29, which means that we were further mitigating. Even only 15% of the site is now covered with hardscape. We tried to really mitigate that, the urban heat island. So here's the footprint. This is the existing site, the footprint of where we started. You can see the weighted curve number came down from 95 to 83, which is really good. And the impervious came down from 95 to 15. So that really made a huge difference. Here you can see that treatment train again. So the water, it goes through a whole series of little rain gardens and check dams, and then it has a long bioswale, which then dumps into this what they call a rill garden. It's basically a large rain garden full of plants. And then there's a dam, riprap dam right here, which holds the water back. And then this part right here, where it says Oval Garden, that is actually a concave, and it will actually hold massive amounts of water in the event of a 100-year flood. The water actually comes up from what they call the storm spring. The storm spring is a large drain, but the water comes out of the drain. So there's 2 4-foot by 4-foot box culverts that come under the park and meet. And then there's a one RCP, one pipe, concrete pipe that comes out of there. And I can't tell you, I've forgotten how big it is. It's either 12 or 18 inches. So, you know, it's a large pipe, but it's not a massive pipe. And in the event of a massive flood, that is the metering the water going into Trading House Creek, which is this little creek. This is the UTA campus. This is Trading House Creek right here. And then that flows into Johnson Creek, which is a federally impaired waterway. And then of course, Johnson Creek flows into Trinity River, which has its own issues. So this is kind of interesting. I'm gonna spend a little bit of time on this. So you can see here, here's the first part of the treatment train is collecting all the water from the roof of the Special Events Center. And by the way, we do use the AC condensate also. And all these places that just look like flat places here, they're all actually little depressions. They're all little rain gardens. So that's a rain garden right there, rain garden right there. This right here where this tree is shown planted, that's a rain garden. This is that big oval depressed area. It's depressed down about 3 or 4 feet, holds a lot of water. There's the storm spring. And so the water comes all the way around here. It's got cattails in a big bioswale, and it comes down here into the real garden, which has gravel on the bottom. It's almost all vegetated now. Riprap check dam. And then the water, you're going to see a video in a second. The water just kind of trickles out here, even after a really heavy rain event. It's just a trickle of water. But there is flooding, controls here. This will actually go into the storm drain if it's overwhelmed, which I've never seen it overwhelmed, but presumably it could be, if we had 18 inches of rain one day or something, which happens occasionally, not very often, thank goodness. So here's where we started. The water was concentrated, right? That's the way they did it 30, 40 years ago. So it was eroding, it was hot, it was dirty, it was running into a channel that had no, particular functionality, into an RCP, and then blasting into Trading House Creek, hot and dirty. And you can see the way it's set up right now, it actually works pretty well. Storm Spring's actually over here, but so these are actually new curb cuts that were designed by Schrickle Rollins. And so the water sheet flows across vegetated buffer, then across this material right here called filter pave, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, then back across some more vegetation, finally ends up in the real garden. This material is unbelievably permeable. It will drain about 30 inches an hour. And that's after it's already been in for a while. So here it is, about 2012. This was installed, by the way, in April of 2011. And you can see that the vegetation was kind of like what we just heard. It was kind of under control. And we'll talk about that a little bit in a minute. But it looked really nice. The planting design was done very well by Schrickle Rollins. And then here it is, actually during a 4.5-inch rain event, after it had been raining really, really hard. You can see it's flooded over here. And the real garden is starting to fill up, but this is about as full as it got. I actually have a little video here, and I apologize if the sound is too loud. I don't know how to control it. Maybe they could control it on your end. But anyway, that doesn't sound too bad. So you see this is an old video because, sort of pre-phones. I took it with my little point and shoot camera, but you can see that real garden filled up with water. And there's the riprap. And that's all covered with vegetation now. So it looks very, this is fairly soon after construction. And then on the left there, you see, you're going to see just a little trickle of water coming out. There's actually 2 6-inch pipes that also come out underneath that dam. And you can see that it's really working. And this was actually while the College Park District was under construction. So there was a lot of silt in the water. It was still coming out fairly clean. So a lot of suspended solids had come out. There's a lot of robustness built into this, so that even though it's been here now for 10 years, it's still functioning great. So it hasn't clogged up or anything. So anyway, I'm going to move on because we're kind of short on time. So here's what it looked like right as it was going in, and you can see they're actually installing filter pave over here and over here. So just have a couple of quick blow ups, and then I'll talk a little bit about filter pave. So filter pave comes in grow bags. It's crushed glass, tumbled crushed glass. It's actually old beer bottles, which we thought was very appropriate for a college campus. And it comes from Minnesota, which doesn't make any sense, right? Shipped all the way down from Minnesota. It's actually a BASF product, in case you don't know about it. So it's a major national company, but it hasn't scaled as far as I know. Maybe you guys know something I don't know, because I really haven't looked into it in the last couple of years. But until it scales in our area, there's not a market to actually make it here, but certainly it should be made here. The glass should be ground, and it's ridiculous to make it up there. So they basically take these grow bags and dump them into these mixer trucks, and then they add a little bit of decomposed granite, some dye, and then at the very last minute they put a polymer in there. It's basically epoxy to hold the glass together, and then it's spread like just like the same way you would spread concrete. You see, first it's screeded out. But of course, there's no rebar. And so the carbon footprint is actually much, much lower than concrete, because so much of the carbon footprint of concrete is either in the cement, but also in the rebar. And there you can see they're floating it just like concrete. And of course, none of these guys had ever worked on this before. So they were, all standing around watching. And I take my students there every year, and it's holding up really well. This was just 2020, so this was last fall. There's a little bit of loose glass on top, but it's not sharp, and it's also not slippery. So it's holding up pretty well. And then here you can see the walkway here, which is actually holding up well. And then I showed it next to some decomposed granite just for comparison. So the granite's holding up well too, but it does have a little bit of vegetation in it. Also, if you take the granite and you kind of rub your hand on it, it's starting to kind of come loose a little bit. The filter pave, which, remember, this is now 10 years old. This picture was just taken a couple of weeks ago. If you take your hand and rub it on it, you can feel the loose glass, but it's not enough to actually move, So, and it's amazingly permeable. I have a cylinder of it in my office. I can take it and put it under a full, turn on the tap, full blast, put it under a tap, and it just goes right through. So it's very, very permeable. It's about twice as permeable as permeable concrete. So I did want to, we've had a lot of discussion about plants. And plants are one of my passions. And I've been looking into actually plants for ecological retention structures and for urban areas in general for the last 5 years or so. It's been one of the major areas of my research. So I did want to show that they did have a fairly sophisticated plant palette. They did a really, really nice job with the plants, I thought. And even though this looks kind of complicated, when it first went in, looking at it visually, it looked really nice. And here you can see it kind of filling in a little bit, still under control. And then I took this picture about 2 weeks ago. And of course, we had a very wet year this year. But the issue in my mind was not the way it was planted. The issue, as often is the case, is the issue of maintenance. And really, it's because we need to, if we're going to have these kind of ecological plantings in urban areas, we need to have almost a different profession. We need to have somebody who's trained in maintaining these things and who's making decisions, sort of creative decisions and horticultural decisions, maybe 2 or 3 times a year. Maybe it only gets maintained 2 or 3 times a year. It doesn't have to be maintained every week. But that maintenance has to have some intelligence, some experience, not intelligence, experience, and knowledge. Really, really important. So that's something that we're going to have to come to grips with. Is that if we want to have landscapes that provide all these ecological and environmental services and look good, and provide aesthetics, that we're going to have a more knowledgeable base of maintenance people. There you can see it at the top. And that was about 10 years ago, 9 years ago, maybe. And then at the bottom is what it looked like a couple of weeks ago. And those were big, beautiful palms last year, and they froze down. And so that's another, that's another decision. What do you do there? Okay, last year it was a big, massive stand of palms. This year, there's nothing. Of course, last year was crazy, right, with the weather. So I think it was a nice project. It was designed well. It's perhaps not being maintained, the way I would like it to be maintained, but UTA is chronically under-resourced, like so many other institutions. If you're interested in ideas about how to constitute plants for ecological retention structures, just Google Hopman PPN. PPN stands for Professional Practice Network. It's from the ASLA. I've written about, I don't know, maybe 15 or 20 articles for them. And if you scroll all the way down to the first article and then work your way up, there are the first 10 will take you through a journey on how to think about plant palettes, and it sort of ends up in ecological retention. So I know it's kind of the undiscovered country when it comes to ecological retention. We say we use native plants, we don't use native plants. We just have to sort of reconceptualize the way we think about plants when they're in those kind of difficult conditions. And obviously I don't have time to get into it, but if you're interested in that, feel free to go over to the ASLA website. It's free. And also you can send me an email, and you see my email address there, and I'd be happy to have a conversation about it, or even talk about it if you want me to talk about it. Very comfortable talking about, spending an hour or two or a week talking about plants. So I guess that's it for me. Do I need to, I think I ran out of time. Do I need to unshare?
I don't think so. I think I can just grab it back from you. So
Okay.
do that now. Thank you so much, David.
And I look forward to getting your questions or sitting here and listening to Brenda talk about her question.
Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate that. We are actually running a little behind schedule, so we're going to have questions at the end of these two presentations that fall in the realm of pavements and services. But we are going to continue on to our next session, which is on lighting. We're going to be talking about LED lighting and solar lighting. And then hopefully we'll have a little bit of time for questions after that. But as always, I do encourage you to enter your questions in the chat box. And presenters, if you'd like to answer questions in the chat box, feel free to do that at any time as well. And hopefully we'll have a little bit of time for Q&A after we are done with presentations. Okay, so next up we have Oscar Vell from the city of Arlington. He's going to be talking about Arlington's LED streetlight conversion project. Oscar, if you would like to say a few words about yourself, that would be wonderful, and then you can go on with your presentation.
Okay, thank you, Sean. Yeah, I was trying to respond to that message box, and it wouldn't let me for some reason. I sent you an email, but my name is Oscar. I'm here with the city of Arlington. I've worked here about 11 years now. I've been over this division for 4 years. Prior to this, I was a traffic crew leader, signal traffic crew leader, and I've worked in facilities and streets. But now I'm in this role, and it's come with challenges. If you all know, but so back in go ahead and go to the next slide. Back in 2016, the city, we have about 23,000 streetlights within our city, and we own them all. Unlike many cities around us, we maintain all of the ones on the road, on highways, arterial, residential, all the high mass. We own them all. So back in 2016, a third party came in and they converted about over 12,700 of those 23,000 lights. They converted to LED, and I believe the city did not have the funds to do the rest of them. So 2 years ago, 2019, the Arlington, we have an Arlington Tomorrow Fund Foundation. They funded the project, or they gave us it was a 4-year project. They funded the first phase of the project, so we were able to purchase in the first phase a few of the lights. So as of now, we have 5,200 left streetlights to do in our residential areas. About 5164. 14 of those, what the canopy lights are, they're over I-30. We have some bridges that go over there that when the entertainment district was built, they put some canopies, hoping that people would walk, be able to walk and be safely walking over the bridge, because they started building the Cold Liquor Store and other restaurants over in that area. For those that know Arlington, you can go next slide.
Real quick, you're sounding a little bit muffled. I just want to make sure if you have a laptop, it's open, or if there's anything you can do to maybe move closer to your microphone.
Does that sound better?
That's much better. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. So for phase 1, again, the Tomorrow Fund Foundation, they granted us money for phase 1. The total amount that we estimated was about $2 million, $2,464,000. For phase 1, we were able to purchase 2,500 fixtures, which again, I don't know if you guys know this area, but so we divided it into sections. We were able to do about a fourth of the city, and we're actually we're almost. Yeah, so we completed the fourth of the city conversion for phase 1. And along with that, there was high mass included in some residential areas. You can go to the next slide. So for phase 2, which we're in it now, we're about to be done actually with phase 2 of 2021. It's about to be over in September 30th. So we have about 300 lights left to retrofit within the residential areas. Phase 3, hoping that we keep receiving funds, will be the third quarter of the city, and then for phase 4 for FY23, we expect to have completed all of the whole city, having the whole city retrofitted to Appendix. Next slide. So for the energy savings, the city wanted to do this, of course, to save money on electricity. So in each of the different savings that we were able to receive, switching over to LED from the 100-watt HPSs, high pressure sodium, we went to for the residential, went to 55 LED, 55-watt LED fixtures, and that's about $1.56 per light per month that we're saving on each light. And again, we had, I think on the residential, we have about 9,600. That's probably the savings. Those other 100-watt, those were in major thoroughfare and minor collector roads. We went with a 94-watt LED, and the savings, it's not as much as the other ones because of the wattage, but 65 cents. And then those 150, those were actually on main road, one of the main roads, Cooper, and anyways, those were switched out. Those were 150. We went to the 100-watt LEDs, and that was a big savings as well. Next slide. So the little bit about the LED itself, they have a typical lifespan of 10 years, where there's no bulbs involved, and it's just one dial. It's complete dial. You don't switch bulbs. It's a whole unit. On the other hand, the high pressure sodiums, they were only 5 years, and that's if they lasted that long. We were replacing some of those even faster within a year, 2 years. They were going after, we were going after the same spot to replace those. The LED warranty that we currently have is 10 years, and the companies we work with, they're very good at switching these out for us if something does go bad with them, but we see very little issues with them, and we have had small issues. They're quickly, easily replaceable. No questions asked. Next slide. So another reason we did this was for the light pollution. The LEDs of course create, and you can see the pictures that they create a wider light. They provide better visibility. And the pattern that they shoot out is more focused on the road rather than just the whole neighborhood. Like you see in the bottom left picture, it's just, it covers yards, it covers, windows, and that doesn't give that clear look. And it's, I've heard, from citizens that, they feel safer. They love the wider light, and they're actually much brighter as well. Although their output is about 55 watt, but their output equivalent to 100 watt. So the city's loving it. Next slide. Oh, that's it. So that's my portion there.
Thank you, Oscar, for that presentation. Really appreciate that. We and really good numbers there as well. We're going to move on to our next presentation, continuing on in the lighting theme of solar lighting. We'll be talking about bus shelter lighting through Trinity Metro. So Sandip Sun is going to join us. He is a service implementation manager at Trinity Metro and has worked in the transportation industry for 16 years. He works on long range and short range service plans and supports the system redesign and implementation projects. He also manages the bus stop infrastructure programs and coordinates different urban design and construction projects with the member and partner cities. So go ahead and get started, Sandip, and hopefully we'll see if we have some time for a Q&A afterwards.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. As Sean mentioned, that I generally work on the route planning, and bus route system comes with the infrastructure. And one of the infrastructure I work on is the shelter lighting that's really needed. And a lot of customers who use our transit system request for lighting at all the bus stops. So next slide. So I will start with the shelter lighting system. It's an off-grid security illumination for every bus shelter. Sean, can you do enter so that I can see all the text also? Yes. So it's off-grid security illumination for every bus shelter. The lighting at the bus shelter is 80 watt solar array, which means we have 2 panels there on top of the shelter, which is on the roof. And the lighting that produced is 8 watt security luminaire. That's a technical term we use for the amount of light we receive for the passengers waiting at the bus shelter. It has the optional cellular monitoring and power for digital display. It means that if there are any digital signage at the bus shelters, we can still power those signage using this solar panel. It's UL listed and it's made in USA. Next slide, please. Why solar? Because we have, a lot of projects going there, and it's always very difficult when we try to connect with the utility lines. So the reason we go with the solar lighting at the bus shelter, it's very fast and it's easy installation, which means that it's low cost and we have minimal site disruption. As I mentioned, that there is no utility to connect. So that means that we can reduce the carbon footprint. It's highly visible, even though it says 8 watt, it's a lot of light for the passengers waiting at the bus shelter. So also it means that also it positions the community which has the solar panels at the bus shelter. So it gives them as or it makes them as the leader in the sustainability who request lighting at the bus shelters around their community. It's long lasting. So we have basically 10 years warranty on that. And we started, I will just let you know, we started this program in 2010, but it's long lasting and it has very minimal maintenance. Next slide, please. So this is just the configuration showing you where the solar panels are placed and also let you know the lighting that comes out of that box. So basically we can place these panels on a sloping roof, which we have, or it can be placed on a vaulted roof also. So underneath the roof, which is basically inside the shelter, there is a green box. So it's a rectangular green box which has the battery and it connects with the solar panel. So that green box inside the shelter actually throws or emits the light on the people waiting at the bus shelter. So it's a very good thing. People really like it because one of the things they like about this lighting is very minimal lighting, and also it improved the security for the passengers waiting at the bus shelter. Next slide, please. So I will just let you know how this solar lighting works. So what happens is during the day, energy from the sun's rays is converted to electrical energy, which is regulated by a charge controller and stored in a battery bank, which is in the middle of the picture, what you see. At night, an intelligent controller uses the energy from the batteries to operate the light according to a preset profile. Also, this profile may be either pre-selected or controlled remotely via cellular modem, depending on the type of the controller used. We really don't have so many people working in this infrastructure side. So basically what we do is we have pre-scheduled rather than controlled remotely. Next slide, please. So in the Trinity Metro solar lighting, we started this program in 2010, but between 2010 and 2016, we did not have enough funding to do this project. So we used to do, say, around five solar panels or 5 locations, I will say, each year. So basically, it means that we have done around 35 or 40 between 2010 and 2016. But we started, building a lot of shelters or installing a lot of shelters between 2017 and 2010, because a lot of people requested to have the shelter so that they can wait safely at the bus stop location. But the number you see between 2017 and 2020, we installed almost around 110. So We now have around 156 standard shelters. The Green Peak shelter is the standard shelter. And we have solar lighting on 3 downtown shelters. Those are basically designed and constructed at site. Most of the shelters in downtown are connected to the utility, but 3 locations don't have utility connection because there were a lot of issues drawing the cables, and we had a lot of problems with that. So we went ahead and put 3 solar panels, or 3 locations which has solar panels or solar lighting at the downtown shelters. All our downtown shelters have lights, either it's utility, through utility or electricity, or through the solar lighting. We took the policy of having the shelters or the new shelters built with the solar lighting. We started this policy in 2017. That's the reason between 2017 and 2020, you see that we have a lot of shelters where we were able to accommodate solar lighting. And also the one thing we found out was there is a lot of cost savings when done together. So it means that we are not calling the contractor twice, once to install the shelter and the second time to install the solar panel. So it means that we are saving a little bit when one contractor comes, install the shelter along with the solar panels. Next slide, please. So this is, we don't have this pole mounted lighting system. It's our plan to have it, but we don't have any grant or funding to have this. So there are quite a few bus stops where there is no lighting or which does not have bus shelter. We generally have bus shelters where there is enough boarding. So there is an analysis that's being done in order to install the shelters at the locations. So this is one of the things we are looking, but it's depending on the funding or grant. If we receive in future, we plan to do this. It's a pole mounted lighting system. It's easily deployed. It's a security lighting. And it also has the option for the digital signage, which means that the pole will have a bus stop sign and a schedule panel, which can be digital signage. And we can basically draw the power from this solar panel. It also enhances the security and reduce the pass-bys, which means that people can wait safely if there is lighting there. And also the driver can see the passengers waiting at the bus stop so that they do not pass by. We can deploy at any bus stop with a standard transit pole. It does not require a different type of pole. And it's UL listed and it's made in USA. Just for your reference, the light that comes out of this solar lighting system is 5 watt compared to 8 watt at the shelter location. And it's a 20 watt solar array. Thank you. I think that was my last slide. I'm happy to take any questions.
All right, thank you, Sandeep. Really appreciate that. It's a very interesting project. We do actually have some time remaining for questions. Sydney, would you like to go ahead and lead our questions? Sydney, are you there?
Sean, can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Okay. I was just saying that if you do have a question, please feel free to use the raise your hand button under the reactions button on the lower right part of your screen. And then in the meantime, I will read some questions from the chat box that we got. So first, this one is for Brenda at Deep Root. Sagar was wondering for silvacells next to compacted soils under the street or sidewalk, the tree root barriers need to be installed at the boundary.
No. So when you excavate out for the silvacells, you over excavate a little bit by about 6 or 12 inches, and then put in a geogrid that attaches to vertically to the sides of the silvacells, and then you backfill and recompact. So that that is how you address that situation. No root barriers are needed, other than you could put them at the tree pit opening just to help direct the roots down past the pavement profile and into the soil. But yeah, that interface happens with a geogrid, and that is the solution that we think works best. It also lets small roots grow out of the silvacell zone, if they can, into the compacted soil zone. Does that make sense?
Sagar, does that answer your question if you're still on the line with us? Awesome. He said yes, thank you. In the chat. Yeah, perfect. Thank you. We have a question regarding solar lighting in the chat box. T. Fisher said, in searching for park lighting options, they found that the solar lighting options were affordable, would not stay illuminated throughout the night. Did you economically justify installation by doing it only a few at a time, or can you share more on the product information? I believe that was directed towards you, Sandeep.
Yeah, I will answer that question. So basically, we have been doing this from 2010, and we have really had good results with it. Our lights do stay from dusk to dawn. So the product that we are using is pretty good. The company we are using is Urban Solar. So basically, they are our contract, and they do it through our shelter contractor also. So their products are pretty good, and really to say, we really did not have to do a lot of maintenance, or we did not have any battery issues or anything. The reason we can, between 2010 and 2016, we did not have any funding to do. That's the reason we did 5 each year, or I will say 10 every 2 years. But we found out logically that if we can club this with the shelter installation, it's much cheaper for us. So any new shelters that goes out in future or now will have the solar panel installed, and we were able to justify economically that it's much more cheaper when we do the total product, which includes the shelter and the solar panel together.
All right, thank you, Sagar. Sydney, do we have any other questions in the chat box we need to address? Sydney, I'm not hearing you if you are speaking. Okay, just wanted to remind everyone, if you would like to raise your hand, you can do that as well. And you can't unmute yourself, but if you raise your hand, I'll go ahead and unmute you if you have any questions or comments. I think those were the only new questions we had in the chat box. We did have a couple of questions related to silvacells for Brenda that she responded to in the chat box as well. Okay, okay, so I think we are pretty good to go. Sydney's having some technical issues, so while we are giving her a chance to rejoin us, I just wanted to mention that we will be sending out an email to everybody to follow up, which will include an evaluation survey. And we'll have this presentation or this workshop recording posted on our website at www.nctcog.org/green infrastructure. So in just a second, we're also going to put that evaluation survey link into the chat box if you'd like to go ahead and fill that out right now. If not, like I said, we will also be emailing that to you. We'd really appreciate it if you could complete that for us. Okay, I'm looking back. Okay. Katie Barron, did you have an additional question about Silva cells? I will see if I can unmute you if you'd like to ask that question.
I can see the question in the chat. This is Brenda.
Mm-hmm.
I thought I wrote it out, but maybe it didn't go out to everyone. Not
Okay.
Sure. Yes, so, sorry. Hold on one sec. So the longevity of solar cells, so it's, we state that the plastic itself, the polypropylene, lasts 100+ years and keeps all of its strength. And we actually think that it lasts longer than that in conditions where there's no UV light, which would be, of course, below ground. So that is sort of the short answer. I hope that's long enough.
And that is great. If we have follow-up questions, anyone can enter that in the chat box or raise their hand. Thank you, Brenda. Sydney has entered the workshop evaluation survey in the chat. Again, encourage you to fill that out. That would really help us out to get your feedback. And again, we will send that out to everybody in a follow-up email. And we'll be posting this workshop recording on our website, which I will also enter in our chat box just one more time. And then I think I don't think we have any remaining questions. So we will go ahead and close out. I want to thank all of our presenters profusely for joining us and taking the time out of your busy schedules for this workshop. I hope it was valuable and helpful for everybody. So thank you all for joining us, and presenters for taking that time and providing all of those really interesting and informative and wonderful presentations. We really appreciate it. Okay.
Thank you, Sean.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Sean.
Thank you.